Greetings, everyone, and welcome to a very special Super Sentai Metal Hero Kaiju Raging, Henshin Shouting, occasionally brought to you by Sandy Frank, edition of Monster Party.
Monster Party!
Monster Party!
Monster Party!
Heroes,
villains, blue Japanese space. Wow.
Oh my! I love
quarries.
blue Japanese space.
My favorite type of space. It really is.
And speaking of space,
Yes,
who are you, sir?
I am Matt Weinhold,
I'm Shawn Sheridan.
I'm Larry STROTHE.
And I'm James GONIS.
and for this episode, this is a gargantuan episode. Yes, it is. See what I did?
You did it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, we're having fun already.
Oh, we are. Well, I love this topic.
Yeah, this topic is one that we all not only enjoy, but I think pretty much worship.
It's ingrained in our DNA.
It really is.
Come on.
Yeah, like since childhood, it's been a very big part of our lives and continues to be.
Yes.
And this topic goes by a Japanese name, but it also has an English translation.
And what is this big space topic?
The topic is Tokusatsu, the art of Japanese special effects.
Tokusatsu!
Ah,
Change-o.
I
Henshin.
love this stuff. I love this stuff.
Change-o. Change-o. Well, this is something we live and breathe. I mean, we collect toys that are, reflect Tokusatsu, and we watch a million different shows and movies.
Mammoth subject.
And, we
this
went to
topic's-
Japan and, we went to like the birthplace of it. And I mean, we just love it. And it's such a massive topic that we needed a very special guest to guide us through this massive world. Who did we get, Larry?
Oh, I tell you, Matt, tonight's guest, he's a celebrated Japanese film, TV, tokusatsu expert. I first learned of our guest in the early 1970s, seen him on the TV show Creature Features with Bob Wilkins.
Woo!
Then again, in the late 1970s on KTVU's Captain Cosmic TV show.
Yep.
Our guest is a writer, a commentator, a lecturer. He's done work on a slew of liner notes for DVD releases. He's edited and authored numerous translated scripts for films, and he has written multiple periodicals for American, Japanese film and television magazines, including Famous Monsters of Filmland.
Yeah.
He is a copywriter and commentator for Shout Factory, and many of his Super Sentai segments can be found on YouTube. But he is also the author of a must-have book called Ichi Tsuburaya, Master of Monsters. I love this book. Guys, please welcome August Ragone!
Welcome.
Thanks, guys.
We are not worthy.
No, August. Oh, it is simply an honor to have you, and it's such a thrill.
Thanks, man. It's good to be here. Thanks. We finally did it.
Yes,
we finally
we
did this.
Yes.
Now,
Every time I would be in LA visiting with friends. Hey, can you come on the show? Oh, I got this thing that I'm doing.
yeah.
Of course you do.
It took a pandemic to get you on the show.
Exactly.
At least there was something positive to come out of this.
But look, August, I know you are an expert in all this stuff, but how did you get into this thing when you were younger, and how did you get onto Creature Features?
Well, it's like how most of us, I've explained it before, it's that when you're a kid and it doesn't necessarily, and it's not gender exclusive, but, it's like little boys get into dinosaurs, and so,
Right.
I got into dinosaurs in outer space and monster movies and all that stuff that kind of follows that trail. And it's a similar vein for every child that got hooked on monster movies. And then for some reason, I started gravitating more towards the Japanese type of monster film. And I can't exactly tell anybody why. I mean, I can't quantify it. I really can't, because, you're a child, you're 4 years old, 3 years old. and this thing captures your imagination. I remember, building some of the Aurora kits.
Sure.
And having the Godzilla kit as well. So that's, that basis that a lot of monster kids kind of have a very similar story. We watched something on TV. I remember very early memories of seeing, I tracked it down to being Revenge of the Creature on TV. Like Revenge of the Creature, Mothra. I'm pretty damn sure one of them was Gorath. The other Toho movies on local TV. And anyway, it was kind of along that line where I started seeing more of these Japanese movies, and they started appealing more to me for one reason or another. Outer Limits. I watched Outer Limits. I watched anything with a monster on TV before I could even really read well. I was like, monster, monster, monster. And then that you started getting a lot of these the Japanese movies going into rotation on the local Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area channels. Mm-hmm. And I just sort of kind of gravitated. The real nail in the coffin, so to speak, would be Monday through Friday broadcasts of Ultraman. That really kind of sealed the deal, because
me too.
When you're a kid, if they showed a Godzilla movie 4 times a year on TV, an adult could go like, wow, that's a lot of Godzilla, for that time. Right. But for a kid, that's an eternity, because you haven't even lived that long yet. Right. You're 5 years old. A year is a very long time. So Ultraman coming in, through your TV screen and into your brain Monday through Friday was kind of a big deal. It was definitely a hypnotic Orwellian indoctrination.
It also seems like that show, when I watched it, all of a sudden it shows up on Channel 20, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I watched the first episode, and it was like someone created a show specifically for me.
Right.
Yeah.
Here's all the things that you like in one go. And then the fact that it was Japanese just added just this other wonderful element of, the exotic.
Well, yeah, it was like nothing else you saw on television. It was just like, what is it? Like, is this from another dimension?
Right. Like, well, the interesting thing about Ultraman too was, there had been animated shows that are kind of similar in tone. Where you have a superhero and they're fighting baddies every week. And a lot of them were Japanese imports. Eighth Man and
Speed Racer,
Gigantor. But the thing with Ultraman was, for a live action production, when you look back at it now, and you really kind of like, we've had a lot of stuff happen in the film industry and the way films are made in the last 55 years. And I'll tell you, there were a bunch of 20-somethings doing this show, and they were using guerrilla techniques. They were shooting with 16 millimeter. They were doing rapid editing, stuff that you really didn't see or appreciate or was really noted by the world at large until MTV came around.
Right.
So you had this kinetic editing. You had this very rapid kind of storytelling going on. You had these guys that were, shooting from weird angles and just doing what they could because they had the freedom to do it. Right. And working with 16 millimeter equipment as opposed to working with 35, the camera was more mobile from them. They could do a lot more versatility in terms of like shooting, composition, or even just the movement of the camera itself. And then you had like this kind of, hip jazz score that wasn't forced. It was very jazz influenced with a lot of electronica in it, as well as, it wasn't like the Peter Gunn where it was very groomed jazz soundtrack. It was kind of very, it was orchestral and it was jazz. It was sort of like this orchestral jazz, outer space sci-fi soundtrack that they added to this show.
And that sound, the music like that, especially as a kid, really sticks with you,
Right. Yeah, it really did. I mean, a lot of people talking back of their childhood memories that hadn't seen the show since they were little would, generally point out the swirling paint at the beginning of the show, or the theme song. Everybody remembered the theme song, or they might remember a piece of music, and those were like the real touchstones that people would remember that hadn't seen the show for a long time. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty incredible how early that show was distributed in the United States. It's pretty amazing because most people's memories, you have a certain generation of people that'll go, oh yeah, I saw that in the early 70s. And so it's just automatically assumed that the show was, syndicated, in the early 70s, when it actually was in syndication in the fall of 1967. Just months after the final episode aired in Japan. They just turned that thing around and got it on American TV as fast as possible.
And what's great about that show too is, it's right during that heyday of color. And the use of color, it just hits you in the face, and everything is these beautiful reds and oranges and blues, and and then you've got the lasers and fire. And,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to denigrate one of my other favorite shows of all time, Star Trek. The original series, of course. But Ultraman honestly has superior optical animation than Star Trek.
Sure,
yes.
Yeah.
Star Trek was shot on 35 millimeter, but I'm talking about, the laser beams and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Trek wasn't bad. It was just kind of functional. What they were doing on Trek at that time. The rays that were being fired by the Science Patrol, or the different beams that Ultraman fired, were pretty amazing. And the gentleman who was the animator on that, Iizuka, is still alive, and he was still doing Ultraman shows until recently.
Wow.
Still doing the optical animation digitally now, but he would hand draw it. On how you hand draw on an iPad.
It's so clean.
And work that in. Yeah. So, but he was doing this stuff really early on, and doing that optical animation all the way back then. It was pretty amazing. Yeah. So, Ultraman's optical effects were also, really pretty advanced for television at that time. In fact, what we were seeing on television, and frankly, a little advanced for some feature films.
Yes.
Yeah. Because what they do, even though I said they were shooting in 16, all the optical animation stuff was shot in 35. And they did that. They had to shoot it in 35 because, that's something they shot that in 35, and because they were processing that on an Oxbury 1200 optical printer, which Subaraya had purchased and overextended himself on originally. And Disney bought the other one. So the Oxbury company sold two of them, and Disney picked up one, and A.G. Subaraya picked up the other one.
Wow.
That's amazing.
All of Ultraman's special effects were enhanced by working on this optical printer that no one else in Hollywood had.
Wow.
MGM, and all the other studios had already broken up their effects department, at that time. And Disney was the only one that still had basically an effects department. Ultraman benefited from that in the subsequent shows that were produced by A.G.'s company that were like Ultraman or followed Ultraman also.
And people would make fun, the non-tokusatsu crowd will make fun of, the monster suits and the fact that it's a guy in a suit and that they're wrestling. And Ultraman looks like he may be wearing some sort of variation of a wetsuit. Okay, fine. But, there's a zipper every once in a while. But as a kid, to me, it's like I'm watching The Greatest Play.
Because it's real and it's tactile.
And there's so much ingenuity in when it comes to the designs and how they would reuse these suits.
Right. Yeah. And the real interesting thing is children's imaginations are sparked by very little. You look, and I'm not denigrating Ultraman, because Ultraman was a pretty expensive TV show to produce for its time. Right. But if you look at it, you go, how much money if you start trying to crunch numbers, knowing they had to build this whole set and they had to do this and that and this, and the amount of time they had to shoot these things in, you kind of see that we're pretty extravagant productions for TV at the time.
Yeah, especially going week to week, a new. And
in Japan, they didn't have the benefit of seasonal breaks. If a network said, okay, we're interested in the show, the sponsors are down, we want you to do 52 episodes. That's 52 episodes in 52 weeks.
Oh my God.
Consecutive. And I've talked to some of the actors, and they were doing that all the way up until recent history in Japan. If they were committed to a year-long show, whether it was a tokusatsu, a special effects show, or a samurai drama, if you were doing full years, you were doing full years.
Wow.
And they would shoot.
Good gig.
Well, yeah, if you want to have an early coronary.
Yeah, that's right.
One of the actors that I became friends with, who did a show in the 70s called Kikaider, which is an android.
I love Kikaider.
Right, sure. And the actor's name is Bon Daisuke, and he was talking. We were talking about the schedule on the show, and that show was shot 6 days a week.
Jeez.
Wow.
And with all the physical stuff, and
and that included going to the location, going to and from, and then they had 1 day of rest and back to shooting on Monday. So Sunday was rest day, and 6 days a week was shooting. And they'd go from one episode to another, and it was basically they had to shoot. It would take them anywhere about 4 days to shoot one episode, 4 to 5 days to shoot one episode, or something like that. So it was a pretty rigorous schedule. And then you see these. Like, I'm a fan of a lot of Japanese stuff besides the monsters and sci-fi stuff, but there were a lot of these samurai dramas that were produced in the 60s. Mm-hmm. That were probably the peak period for them to produce these action dramas. And you would see that the show ran 15 years and had 801-hour episodes. And that, if you look at the Japanese television production schedule from that period of time, like late 60s to the early 80s, there were just scores of shows like that. There was like a spy show called Key Hunters, which was kind of a takeoff on Mission Impossible.
Okay.
But that was a star vehicle for Tiger Tanaka himself, Tetsuro Tamba, and he was running an organization of these guys who basically had a license to kill and go across international borders. It was supposed to be an undercover secret hush-hush arm of international secret police.
Right.
But these were the secret police. And Sonny Chiba was in the cast.
Wow.
Fantastic.
And so he said, I want to do all this crazy stunt work. And they did. They did something like, I don't know, 500 episodes of this show. And there were 1 hour episodes. This is 1 hour episodic television. Every week there's a new episode. They were shooting episodes. They eventually ended up like shooting episodes like in Hawaii and Hong Kong and Singapore. And I think they did one in Europe, because the show was so popular.
God.
Hey, can I ask you a question? So they're making shows like this. Was it a standard practice to not use sync sound? Because I know that, I guess in the early Ultraman shows, I know that they would just their lines, but they would just dub everything later.
Right. It was sort of the same kind of deal as what was happening in Italy. Right. Where there would be like other productions being shot next door. Carpenters would be building sets like 100 feet away outside.
Yeah, that's what you always hear about, like American stars when they're doing an Italian film. Like, wait a minute, the director says action, and like there's all this sound. Like, what's going on? Like, right, because all their stuff.
There's a bagpipe factory above us.
Yeah,
that was pretty much typical, unless one of the actors was a big wig actor.
Right.
If they had a big wig actor in the cast, even if he was like the head of an organization that only appears once in every episode, to go like your mission, Hiroshi, if you choose to accept it. If you had a guy like that, they would do a live mic.
Okay.
Because he wouldn't come back to do the overdubbing.
I see. Okay.
What the Japanese call after recording.
I see.
So they wouldn't be able to come back for that. So and it's interesting because sometimes you'd shoot an episode. And then the writers or the director would decide, oh crap, we're going to change a line. So it was easy to change a line in the after recording.
Right.
When they did the post sync. So so they dubbed these shows. They basically shot them silent, dubbed them. Then they were sent to America to get dubbed again.
Right.
Works for everybody.
The syndication of Ultraman, made them globally popular, more or less, but part of the appeal of a lot of these shows, or the seductive appeal of them, was that like the more that you might see something about them in a magazine, or maybe looking at a Japanese book and you'll see a picture of something, it's like you could not find these, you couldn't see them, there was no way to get your hands on them, and for me the prime example of that is the show that Tsuburaya did right before Ultraman, which was Ultra Q.
Right.
Which up until recently was never available, subtitled or dubbed.
Right. But also, is it safe to say that the original Ultraman, once it hit the States in America, it kind of crystallized the whole thing for America? Like suddenly we had Ultraman, but before that, wasn't it Shin Toho, like Supergiant and Moonlight Mask in the 50s? Right. That was kind of the beginning of the Tokusatsu, and it was black and white.
Right. Well, there's one thing I want to touch on really quick about Ultra Q before I forget. I just don't want to forget this. So Ultra Q was actually purchased for the United States. It was while it was being shot, CBS Films, the film production division of the CBS television network, the same company that produced The Twilight Zone, that shot and produced The Twilight Zone with Sterling. They were interested in Ultra Q, so they picked it up. And it was dubbed. There's 28 episodes of Ultra Q, and all 28 episodes were dubbed in Toronto, Canada, at Film Sounds, which later became Deluxe Studios Toronto. And they hired some local Canadian actors to dub the character voices. Some of those episodes ended up circulating on 16 millimeter film in the film collector's market here in the States. I know a couple people who have a couple episodes.
Me too.
And it's like, and nobody will share the damn things.
No.
But okay, so here's what happened in the very long and short of it. So CBS Films, by the time they got this show ready, the big push in the United States in 1966 with cooperation between the television production companies and television makers, the makers of your fabulous television sets. 1966 was the big color or bust year. Since Ultra Q was in black and white, syndicators weren't interested in it.
Wow. Okay.
So you had things that slipped just under the wire, like, Astro Boy and Gigantor, two animated series that were sold before 64 in the United States, or before 65, rather. You had Eighth Man come in 65. So those got under the wire. Ultra Q, you couldn't sell it if you wanted it. So CBS Films decided they were going to shelve it. So CBS Films shelves it, and United Artists decides, well, we'll pick it up too. And I have documentation, actual period documentation, that United Artists Television also picked up Ultra Q, and some of the trades even list it. And they said, they got this new series, and it just sat there. Nobody wanted it. So maybe a couple of stations did. You got to dig deep, go through like the newspaper archives, look for TV listings, and try to find things that way. But Ultra Q almost made it.
Wow. Years later, because I watched Ultraman when it played on Channel 20, and I loved it, and then it disappeared. And then, I got a little bit older and I kind of forgot about it. But then when VHSs were coming out and I went into some Japanese video store, I discovered I had no idea that they continued to make Ultraman shows.
Right.
And that there was one before. I had no idea that there was one before. And so watching, there was I got a tape that was like a compilation, of here are the best moments of all the shows. And I was like, what is this?
Right,
And I'm so mad that we were robbed that opportunity.
And Ultra Q also, Tsuburaya recycled more of the costumes from the Godzilla films in Ultra Q than he even did in Ultraman. Right.
And then there was a really good reason. They had a pretty big budget for Ultra Q because they actually shot Ultra Q in 35. They also had a shooting schedule they had a 1.5-year shooting schedule to shoot 28 episodes. Wow. So they started shooting Ultra Q in the fall of 60, about a 1.5 years, about a year. They started shooting in the fall of 64, and they wrapped somewhere in the lower end of 65. And the first episode premiered on January 2nd, 66. So they had a very luxurious time to produce this show. Though
gorgeous.
Tsuburaya was like the kind of guy that was, doing practical effects and also thought practically. And he said, well, it's not so much cutting corners. It was more like, where can we allocate? If I can do this instead, then that means I can allocate that much of the budget that would have been into going to make that new monster. Nice. I could take that money and put it somewhere else into production. And no, he didn't line his pockets with the cash. They put it into things like we could build a much bigger miniature set.
Yeah.
We could spend more money on optical effects because optical effects were very expensive. Like I think it was a quote from the director of the GAMERA, the 60s GAMERA films, Noriaki Uasa, said when they did GAMERA, Return of the Giant Monsters, or GAMERA versus Gauss, every time Gauss fired his sonic, what they call a sonic scalpel, his little beam that came out, every time he shot that out of his mouth, it cost 2,000 yen. which at the time was something like $25-30 or something like that. So every time he fired a beam, they're going like, well, it's going to cost us this much just to produce that. So Tsuburaya was going like, I'm going to take, if we could dress up this other monster thing, or we could strip, they even did things like, we're going to strip this Rodan miniature, that flaps its wings, we're going to strip it down and build it up. So they strip it down to the armature, make it into a new monster. How much money did we save? And also how much time? And then he goes, now we could build a bigger miniature city set or something, or whatever. So he cycled that through Ultraman. And, like, if you don't have the context, fans are easy to, especially fans that are kind of new to, they're not even fans that are new into it, but fans that just don't have the exposure to how the production was made in general. Would go like, well, we just assume the thing, that he just did that to save money because it was a low budget show. And that's just like an assumption without any context. So, but it's a natural assumption and something that I'm not trying to assume shame anyone, but that's what you would but that's what you would naturally.
Well, he was very resourceful. Think. Yeah. He's super resourceful and knew how to write on one of the most bang for the buck on the screen.
Well, when you have a monster like Gyros, I mean, it's so obviously it's just a redressed Godzilla.
Yeah,
and that was something. What that had to have been on purpose, right?
That was definitely on purpose because there was,
I like Gyros. I liked him.
Yeah, I think Gyros is cool. But what they did is they did. You had these things now at the time when Ultraman was coming out. It hit pop culture pretty big, sort of like Ultra Q was the first one that hit really big. And then Ultraman followed suit and made it even bigger. What they called the monster boom of 1966. We had the bat craze here. Mm-hmm. They had the monster boom. And so there were a number of manga that came out weekly and monthly in Japan. And a lot of stuff was geared towards boys, boys magazines, boys manga. And they would do these color pictorials because monsters, kaiju was the big thing. So they would hire these artists doing like what if battles.
Right. Yeah.
And there would be these beautiful paintings, 2-page full splash page spreads, like a Godzilla fighting, a
Gargantua or something.
Or
I have books like that.
Yeah. And a lot of those are adapted. A lot of those are reprints from the magazines of the time. And so you would have there was one that had Kong fighting King Ghidorah. And they did these what if battles, which were really kind of just to stoke the children's imagination. So kids would go, wow, don't buy that magazine. This magazine is Kong versus Ghidorah, and they did like very fanciful, there was no giant QC or quality control or IP licensing stuff that had to be They just said, they would just let people rip loose and do whatever they wanted. And it was pretty amazing. So a lot of people would say things like, oh, I bet Godzilla could beat Ultraman. Jesus and Superman, Godzilla versus Ultraman.
Who would win?
Right. So that was kind of like, it was sort of a thing where like Eiji Tsuburaya produced Ultraman. It was his company, Tsuburaya Productions, which a lot of people think is a separate company, but it was actually a co-venture between Tsuburaya and Toho. And in fact, most of the boards of directors on the company at that time were Toho producers, Toho executives, and film producers were on the board of directors. So, Tsuburaya could just walk over. He really ran that studio. I mean, a lot of people go like Kurosawa is doing all these big international hits, but Toho didn't take Kurosawa seriously because he makes films that appeal to foreigners. He's not doing anything for the domestic box office. His films weren't really that successful.
Well, if Rashomon had like Ultraman in it, it would have been a different movie.
Yeah. What's Ghidorah's point of view?
Exactly. Let's get to that.
3 different points of view.
Right.
There's got to be something Kafka behind King Ghidorah, So the Tsuburaya could just go over there or just send his guys. I mean, Tsuburaya Productions wasn't that far away. They were shooting at an auxiliary Toho studio that they shot some of the more. They shot Kurosawa outdoor locations. They built all the big sets that were burned. Like the major Godzilla fire sequences were shot at this auxiliary studio Toho had.
No.
That was later called Toho Built. But at the time, I think it was just the Tokyo Art Center was what it was called at that time, even when they were shooting Ultraman. So they shot all the Ultra Q, Ultraman, Ultra 7, and then they came back later and shot all the rest of the more recent Ultraman shows in the last 25 years there. But anyway, so they said, like, Tsuburaya would just go, yeah, go grab the Godzilla suit. Bring it down here. So what they did with that particular suit is they just didn't take the suit. It had already been cut up.
They cut up the suit?
Yeah, that suit was already modified. And it was modified for a department store, Japanese department stores. Like, you go to like San Francisco International Airport and you can see the Kirk Hammett monster collection. You can see all of his memorabilia, right? So they did these things in department stores in Japan where you could go into a department store and King Ghidorah's like strung up to the ceiling.
Oh my God.
Wow. Right? Or you could walk through it and there would be like a diorama with the actual monster suits on display.
It's like a good version of Fries.
Yeah, exactly. Kaiju fries. Kaiju fries.
Can you imagine seeing that as a kid?
Yeah, one of my aunt, my mom, not my mom's twin sister, but my mother, another mother of my mother's sisters. Her husband was stationed in Japan in the early 60s. And I inherited a lot of like 45 records. She bought a lot of Japanese artists at the time, which I'd listened to. It was like I was so Japanese hungry when I got into these movies. I go, anything that had Japanese in it, I wanted to have it. So I'd spin these records, And little did I know in that collection, I did have Q Sakamoto's Sukiyaki was in that batch of 45s, which became a big hit in the States too. Like the first Japanese song, in Japanese to be a chart in the United States.
Right.
But anyway, so my aunt told me that she saw, and I'm like 9 years old or 8 years old, and she said she saw King Ghidorah in a department store, and I, in my head, said no. I just would shake my head and listen to what my aunt said. I go, there's no way she saw that. There's no way.
You couldn't, your head would explode.
I was like, why would that be in a department store? I didn't blurt things out loud, so I never contradicted adults until I became a teenager. I started contradicting adults. But I was a kid. I was just like, no. And then years later, I see pictures and I'm going like, crap.
King Ghidorah, women's lingerie.
Right, exactly.
Right.
But now in Japan, I mean, there are still exhibits that are done, I think, sometimes in department stores, but now they're treated like museum quality.
Right, exactly. Yeah. They're doing a lot more of that. Every year there's an event there's one of the districts in Tokyo has 23 wards, basically 23 neighborhoods. One of them is Ikebukuro, and there is a building. It used to be the tallest building in Asia. It was because it was 60 stories, and it was the tallest building in Asia at one time. And the Sunshine 60 building. And every year they do the Ultraman Festival, and a whole floor of that building is taken over by a walkthrough museum, playroom, Ultraman toy shop. It's just an Ultraman Wonderland with the suits on mannequins, dioramas, and the original miniatures, and what survives, all that which survives, because sometimes things broke down and they would just go, throw it in the trash.
Sure.
And they would just throw things in the trash.
Or they decay, there's that.
The suits, especially the suits. But the whole thing with the Godzilla was basically, Tsuburaya went, hey, go bring the Godzilla suit. And what happened was, they had taken the 64 Godzilla suit, which had been used in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, with a modified head. It was different than the head from 1964. But then they took that head off, and they made a new head. They put the head on it, which was sort of a hybrid head from, I believe it would have been Monster Zero. It wasn't the Monster Zero head, but it was another head that they made and they put that head on it. And it's up. They had it suspended by wires, at this department store. So they took that, fixed it up, repainted it, put the frill on, put it in an episode, and then they just went back to where it came from after that.
Wow. I love the fact that you're living in a world where you go, all right, give me a Godzilla head, Ghidorah body, Rodan wings. Let's do it.
We're just going to make it right now. And so, there was a lot of that. We're going to borrow the props. They're just sitting there. Let's, modify this prop, or let's modify this suit or whatever, which is kind of neat, It adds a nice layer as a fan in the,
it makes it like the mystique of it. Yeah.
It makes it like a game almost, like whose legs are those?
Yeah. Is that Manda? I think
August. So
it's like, whose talons are those anyway?
Right. So August, but is it safe to say that with like Ultra Q and Tsuburaya, it became much more monster kaiju centric, but still before that, the heroes of those shows like Moonlight Mask and Supergiant, those were still really popular, right? But But it wasn't really until Tsuburaya took those shows that just kind of really upped everything. Like
it's like with shows like Moonlight Mask or Gekko Kamen, which was technically the first Japanese superhero on television, although his supernatural or superhuman powers are questionable. He was basically an alter ego for a detective. He had 2 revolvers or 2 45s, depending on what iteration. He drove a Honda. He drove like a Honda scooter, but that was like that show when it started. It was short. I think there were 15-minute episodes that were like done like a serial, like a Republic serial.
Right.
And it was a phenomenal, huge hit. They were doing it. It was on every day at first.
Jeez.
And then it went to once a week when they expanded a half-hour show, and then started drawing out. And they did 13 episodes per story, and they did these 13-episode arcs like a chapter serial. And it was hugely phenomenally popular. And Moonlight Mask would have been, in fact, the TV series was so popular, Toei Company, it was a separate company than the company that produced Moonlight Mask.
Right.
Toei was like one of the up-and-coming rivals, a young studio doing really crazy, audacious, action-oriented films. They got the rights to do feature film adaptations of the Moonlight Mask TV show with a different cast. And it had to be a different cast because they were still producing the TV show at the same time.
Okay.
Wow. They did several feature films that ran about an hour and a couple minute, kind of like old 1940s B movies where they ran
programmers. They could do
like Monogram or Republic 60 minute movies.
PRC.
And they did completely different adaptations of some of the same stories. Right, because it was a comic book first. It was a manga. And then it became a TV show, and then it became this movie series that Toei did. And then there was a tragedy that happened that's similar to tragedies that would come later in America around the same time.
Oh, I read about this,
Yeah, where a boy thought he was Moonlight Mask and jumped out of a window. And
no.
Yeah.
Damn.
We had an incident with that with Superman in the States too, right?
Right.
So that immediately the Japanese company apologized, and that was the end of Moonlight Mask's career.
Oh,
man.
So that show would have kept. It was so popular that show would have kept going. So they can't. They decided to play down like these crazy stunts because they were doing kind of like these proto ninja. Well, ninjas existed before Moonlight Mask, but they did this like the kung fu movie techniques where Moonlight Mask would jump up on top of a high wall by jumping off and running the film backwards.
Super powered ninjas.
Yeah, kind of like stuff you'd see in Shaw Brothers movies, in the 70s, martial arts films.
Yeah.
So, they were doing a lot of that kind of thing. So they, the kind of serial heroes they created, this company called Senkosha created after that, were a little more down to earth, and they weren't, doing these crazy stunts that kids might imitate. And then that would come back around later. So then you get Starman or Supergiant.
Right.
If you remember the old Starman black and white movies.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes, we do.
Love them.
And those things were like, Like the first one that was brought to America was, well, the first one in the package is Atomic Rulers, Atomic Rulers of the World. And Atomic Rulers runs about, all of them run about the same length. They run about roughly 78 minutes a piece, 78 to 80, because those were edited together for American television. And because they had to be edited together, because these were done as theatrical shorts. And they were, the first several of the Starmans were hour long, or, you know, just about an hour long each. So they took nearly 2 hours of that story, and the Americans edited it down to about 80 minutes. So there's a lot of footage. There's subplots going on in that story, and characters that you never meet in the American version.
It just kind of adds to the crazy surrealness of it, though.
The Tokusatsu version of The Room.
Right. Kind of did that. So the first couple of these things were 2-parters that they put together, and then the last 3 were standalones. And so they said, this is where it gets unhinged. And so they had these 3 they were all independent stories. They had 3 of them, and Walter Manley Enterprises, Walter Manley, who later went on to produce The Green Slime and all the Italian Gamma 1 movies.
Yeah,
Gamma Quadrology.
Yeah.
So Walter...
a treasure to the world, obviously.
Yes.
Yes. So Walter Manley, they just decided, well, you know, we're going to take these 3 independent stories. They've all got great scenes in them. Let's cut them together. So all 3 of them together run about an hour and 45 minutes, and they cut it down to like this 80-minute movie of insanity where characters come and go, villains come and go, but they're all supposed to be the same. That's Evil Brain from Outer Space. That's what they turned it into. And it took an evil brain to make that. And
thank God he had the globe meter. Remember that's his little
the globe
device
meter,
it's like a watch they can do anything with.
It lets them fly through space. It lets them speak any language on Earth. And to be able to withstand all forms of radiation.
Of course.
Yes, of course. So that was like theatrical stuff. And that was done by a kind of a studio called Toho, which was a bunch of strikers from Toho studios that didn't like their policies, and they formed their own company, and they took over one of Toho's auxiliary studios and said, "We're founding a new studio, F you." And
we want to work 7 days a week.
I mean, they called in tanks. The Americans came in with tanks.
Wow.
God.
This happened in the late 40s while the occupation was still happening.
No way.
So this was considered sort of a communist uprising, which the Americans didn't want. The Americans didn't want any commies. They didn't want Japan to go commie.
No.
So it was this proletariat uprising at Toho Studios, and some of their big actors went over there for a while, and then a little later they were seduced back. But that studio ran from like 48 until 61 when it declared bankruptcy. It just couldn't keep up with the others anymore, you know.
Right.
And at that time, all the studios still owned their theatrical chains. So, and in Japan, that's the case today.
Really?
Yeah, you've got Toho Cinemas still over there, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they never broke up the monopolies like they did here, you know.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
So with Ultra Q and then Ultraman, though, was it those shows at the Subaraya Productions that kind of opened the floodgates, kind of?
Yeah, they kind of really did that, because you had other live action hero shows. You had you had one called Submariner 8823. I think 8823. And it was like based on a manga by the guy who wrote the story treatment for Rodan, Ken Kuronuma, and it was about a submariner that comes to the surface to make peace with the people of the Earth, the surface dwellers.
Unlike our Submariner.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And he had a nifty like superhero suit and everything, you know. And then you had another show, a really great show, which I think there's a couple episodes that are lost forever, but they released them on DVD, all these extant episodes, called Space G-Men. And it's kind of like kind of a Japanese version of Rocky Jones, but they fight bad guys. They're fighting an evil organization, you know, trying to overthrow the Earth. And that's got all kinds of great miniature rockets. And the main character wears, you know, he wears a mask, a little mask over his eyes, a cat mask. So you don't know who's the secret identity of Space
Who could this
G-Man.
possibly be? Hey,
Right.
Could possibly be him.
A
You know, and then
cat
you had like,
vest.
yeah, and then you had, Invasion of the Neptune Men.
Oh
Great,
yeah,
great.
Over here,
Love
Star
it.
Chief, and
Sure.
the Japanese version of that is wonderful because it's actually longer than the American version, but they had to cut out stuff from the American version, so then they had to pad the American version with stock footage.
Right.
It's really weird. It's really weird. I think I shot a thing for that for Shout Factory for the Mystery Science discs when they put that out, and I explained that there's musical numbers.
Wow.
Japanese version.
No.
Larry.
The whole opening credit
I
sequence
love
is a song about Space Chief, but in the Japanese version, his name's Iron Sharp. So there's the kids break out into song, and they sing the Iron Sharp song.
What's it? Iron Shark. I gotta get Iron Shark. How's it go? Do you know?
Oh, I can't remember
The
right now.
Iron Sharks will have their way tonight.
Exactly. There you go. Yeah. It's kind of like a children's march.
Oh,
You know,
Right,
it sounds
right.
like a little
Gamera-y.
Oh, yeah.
kind of like that. Yeah.
And
But,
the Neptune Men is is similar to Prince of Space too.
right. And Prince of Space was another thing that was a TV show that was popular. And then that became a movie that was different than the TV show.
Oh, really? So the TV show doesn't exist anywhere. Or that's
No,
what
the
we've
TV
put
show
out?
the TV show was put out on Blu-ray in Japan recently.
Wow.
Wow.
Let's go.
Which
Yeah.
one is the one with Sonny Chiba? Because he was in one.
That's Invasion of the Neptune Men, or the
right.
Japanese version is called High Speed Spaceship, if you translate it into English.
Which was that little rinky car they drove around in.
Right. Yeah. He had that thing, and that was designed, that car and the enemy spaceship in that kind of looks like a Bonstel, Bonstel spaceship. And the saucers were all designed by the chief designer for Ultra Q, Ultraman, Ultra 7, Toho Narita. It's the same designer the same guy who also designed the Gargantuas.
Oh.
Yeah,
nice.
Toho Narita, this guy Narita, also designed all the monsters in Ultra Q, Ultraman, Ultra 7, the vehicles, all the vehicles and the equipment and stuff like that. He designed all the primary pieces for all those shows. So yeah, Ultraman, Ultra Q and Ultraman was the two shows that blew everything up. Of course, there was another company that was tracking Ultra Q, and they were going to do a Osamu Tezuka, the guy who created Astro Boy and Kimba the White Lion, had his own property. He had his own property that was kind of super heroic, outer space guys trying to protect the Earth. And they were going to do an animated series. That kind of fell through. Nobody was interested because networks were looking for another Ultra Q. The other networks wanted similar programming. And most companies, independent companies, or even some of the established studios were like, we can't spend that kind of money, man. It's crazy. We can't compete with Subaraya. But this one company said, we'll do it. If the network and the sponsors want to pay for it, we'll do it. And it became this show called Magma Taishi, or Ambassador Magma, which premiered actually several days before Ultraman did.
Space Giants,
full-color
Larry.
show, and that's Space Giants.
Oh, I love Space Giants. I mean, I saw Space Giants on Captain Cosmic, and that's what introduced me to Space Giants. I was hooked. Goldar, Silvar, Little Gam. Yeah. I love that show.
Yeah,
I didn't know it was premiered before Ultraman, though.
Yeah, neither did I.
Yeah, it made it. It was this battle of like, we're going to get this on air before Ultraman.
Right.
And then you had Ultraman having its own production problems, which delayed the show by a week. And what happened was they started shooting this, and they didn't have the same schedule Ultra Q had, which was, okay, you start shooting, we want it on the air, we'll just put it on the air, New Year's 66, it's late 64, go ahead, And with Ultraman, it was sort of like when Ultra Q was, at the height of its first run, the network, we said we want more. And there was original plans to do a second series of Ultra Q, just do more of the same. But one of the ideas was to save money. Subaraya, again, trying to like shuffle the money around. He was going, well, why don't we do a versus series? And the versus series would have been, we'll just pick two different monsters from Ultra Q against each other in every episode.
Wow.
Yes, please.
We'll just work it around there. And then like
repurposing it all. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the network was, no, we want something new. Just come up with something new. And the first idea for Ultraman wasn't even a humanoid alien. It was going to be a monster. It was going to be a monster that would fight other monsters, kind of like the Godzillian protector of the earth. But so they were going to come up with this monster that was going to be based on a Thai or Indonesian creation from mythology called the Garuda, which is a winged, kind of like humanoid bird creature. So it had a bird beak, it had these wings, but it stood like a man, arms and legs like a man, full of scales and claws. It's part of mythology, a mythological creature that's not in Japanese mythology, except the closest thing in Japanese mythology is the Karas Tengu, or the Tengus that live in the mountains that are like bird-like creatures that come in human form. They stand like men, but they have wings, they have beaks. So they were going to have this creature fight other monsters. And then the network, as they're doing development, they started saying, well, hey, there might be some confusion with audience members. They're not going to really understand which is the good monster and which is the bad monster. If you just tuned in late, you jump in late, you might not know who so they said, well, why don't we come up with a heroic character that will be completely different than the monster he fights, and make it look completely different. And so they had already developed this whole thing with the Science Patrol, and a guy from the Science Patrol, and the monster comes out to fight the bad monsters. So it was taking shape as Ultraman. So then they decided we're going to change this, and they came up with, like, why don't we do a humanoid alien? Most of those designs were rejected because they looked too sinister. They looked like bad aliens. And then, so finally, Toho Narita, the designer, kept thinking about, well, there should be a definite theme that delineates the monsters from the hero. So he decided to use the Greek concepts of cosmos and apotheosis, the chaos. So chaos and cosmos, and Ultraman would represent cosmos. The monsters would designate chaos. So that's why the monsters are designed very kind of like with jagged edges, lots of jagged edges and strange shapes, because they represent chaos. And Ultraman is smooth, and because he represents, he's very smooth
and sexy.
Yes, he is. He shaves. And
quite a beta capsule.
Cosmos. Yes, and quite a beta capsule. So that's how they basically came up with Ultraman. There's a lot more to it, but obviously,
I love that design.
That's that starting point.
That design is just so beautiful.
Classic.
And so unique. There was nothing like that at the time.
And I have to say, even though I would, if I had to pick one Ultraman series that is my favorite, and I think most people kind of agree with this, but it would be Ultra 7, because it's just so everything is just so perfect. But I still prefer the original design of Ultraman. Nothing beats that.
Yeah, it's just a classic design. An interesting thing about the design too is that the network and the people who were telling Narita what to do, they were going like, we want something that represents the space age. The network told Tsuburaya Productions. And so they, okay, well, we'll kind of have them very sleek. We'll have them silver. That kind of looks like a rocket. And then Toho Narita came up with the idea with the red stripes. A lot of people are like, are those his underpants and his bra and he basically went with the flow of the body to come up with the lines. But his inspiration for the lines were the red canals of Mars.
Wow,
interesting.
I did not know this.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
And it's so beautiful. It works so perfectly. It's just so pleasing to the eye.
Right.
And then, of course, light up eyes. You give me light up eyes, and I'm just as happy as I can be.
and a blinky button on
and the
your
blinky
chest.
button.
Right.
Yeah. I always like that too, the vulnerability, because Superman can just keep fighting, and you give him kryptonite, but how often does that happen?
Right.
But
and the writers were getting ready to get this show on the air and start shooting, and almost at the 11th hour they were still had a quandary, because they were having meetings. They'd go over everything over and over because the show could not be a failure. It had to be a hit. So they were really mulling over every small little detail. And they one problem they kept coming back to was like, how is anybody going to care about Ultraman, because he has like unlimited powers?
Yeah.
He gets power from the sun, and it was beta rays, hence Beta Capsule. There's another link that wasn't expressed in the show itself, but they're going, he has no Achilles heel.
Right.
And they said, we have to give him an Achilles heel because we need to create some tension and drama. Is Ultraman going to be able to defeat the monster? Because kids will just go, I wonder what weapon he's going to use to kill this one. And then, you know.
Yeah.
And so they came up with the warning light, and they came up with the 3-minute time limit because it was a round of boxing.
Oh, that's really clever. Yeah.
It also works because in the structure of a TV show, a certain number of acts, you know, you have to build some kind of urgency.
Right. So that was.
You know, it gets me though is, you know, they would say his light would start blinking. It goes faster, faster. And if it's like, oh my gosh, if it goes out, that means he runs out of energy. But for me, I thought, well, you know how if you're driving a car, if your little dial is on the E button, you go, I know I have a few little more gas.
He's on vapors now.
That's a vapors of sun vapors. So I thought even if the button were, that was just my thought.
Right. You know, that probably would have happened. But, you know, in later shows, in later Ultraman iterations, they've explored that, like, if he runs out of power, if his warning light runs out, he just changes back to human.
Yes.
Right.
You know, so Ultraman collapses and changes back to a human.
I have an Ultraman egg timer.
I've seen those. Those. Yeah, exactly. Then that was the thing that was in the original show. They explicitly say that, you know, if the energy runs out, Ultraman will never rise again.
Yes.
Which is basically he's going to run out of energy. He's going to die. In the later shows, they kind of got away with it. They go, let's let him run out. Let this Ultraman run out of energy, and he's just going to revert back to the human form. But that added tension for kids, even though it was formulaic in every single episode.
Yeah.
And eventually it happened. He had his warning light damaged. 55-year-old spoilers. And that's in the final episode, his warning light is damaged and he dies.
And it's Zeton, right?
Yeah. In the American version, they kind of like he's knocked for a loop, but in the Japanese version, he's dead.
Huh. Okay.
So the other guy shows up. The other guy, what's Zophie?
Zophie. Yeah, Zophie.
So Zophie shows up, one of his other, you know, fellow beings, and brings 2 lives. They're so advanced they have life energy, and because in the first episode of the Japanese version, Hayata's dead, and then Ultraman goes, "I'm going to give you my life force." So in the American version, they make it kind of sound like you're messed up. We're going to become one so you can keep living. Mm-hmm. But in the Japanese version, it's like, Hayata, you're dead. I'm going to bring you back to life, but we have to share the same body. So in the last episode of the Japanese version, Zophie shows up and says, I have these 2 lives, one for Hayata, one for you. So you can separate now and you can go your own happy ways. The American version leaves it off in the end narration where Hayata needs Ultraman to return to keep living. And then Ultraman is going to come back is what they kind of lead on in the American version. So the narration at the end is different than the Japanese narration, which is like, so the final goodbye.
Yeah. Okay. So you got now that show has ended. And and I'm assuming, you know, they've already geared up for producing Ultra 7. I know that somewhere in between around this time is Captain Ultra, right?
Right, exactly.
Capitalizing on the whole Ultra thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so the thing with that is that the network came to Tsuburaya Productions. And, you know, like I said, that breakneck schedule they had in shooting this as opposed to Ultra Q, shooting Ultraman, like they kind of like wore out their whole entire production staff, from the writers, the guys actually shooting the episodes. In Japan back in those days, they would shoot things in 13 episode blocks. So something might get approved. So you might be in the first set of 13 or the second set of 13 episodes, and the network would go, okay, we want to do 2 more sets of 13, extend the show and go that way. And so they got to that point, and the network and the sponsors were like, keep making Ultraman. Keep making Ultraman. We'll keep going to 52 instead of 39, which it ended up being. And AG Tsuburaya said, look, the staff is burned out. We need a break. And we're running out of steam. We're going to run out of ideas. I'm kind of bored with this show right now because I think we've done everything we can do with it without being repetitive. And we don't want to become a weak second half.
Right.
You know, so we don't want to do a 3rd season of Trek, you know, which there are. We don't want to do a Fred Freeberger Space 1999 season 2, Trek season 3.
Buck Rogers, second season.
Yes. So AG Tsuburaya goes, no, we're not going to give you what you want. We're going to stop. He goes, we're going to stop and we're going to come up with something brand new. But you're going to need to give us 26 weeks to bring you the new thing, the next new thing. And that became Ultra 7. So the network had kind of like formed this whole thing where they wanted that time slot on the Ultra night, Ultra Q, Ultraman, and they wanted to keep Ultra in the public's mind. So the network went to Toei and they hooked up with a producer called Toru Hirayama. Toru Hirayama was a guy who produced some kid shows, live action special effects kid shows. And they said, we need a space show, something to fill the gap between Ultraman and the next show that Tsuburaya is doing. You have 24 weeks. We need something to fit that space. And it has to have Ultra in the title.
Wow.
Can you make it? And Hirayama said, yes, we can do that. And Hirayama, of course, later, about a year later, produced Giant Robo, or Johnny Sacco and his Giant Robo.
That's where, wow.
So there is this interconnectivity to what Toei was doing too. But the interesting thing, I'll backtrack a little bit, is right before they produced Captain Ultra, they were doing a TV show based on a manga by the same guy who created the characters for Johnny Sacco, Mitsutaro Yokoyama. Yokoyama created what we know as Gigantor before that, but he did this ninja show, and ninjas were super popular in Japan in the early 60s. There were ninjas in movies, there were ninjas on TV, there were ninjas in manga, there were ninjas everywhere. They were in your wardrobe, they were down the street. There were ninjas everywhere. It was called the ninja boom. The early 60s had the ninja boom, then they had a kaiju boom, they had all these crazy booms.
I wish I was in Japan in the 60s.
I know. That sounds so great.
Especially since the US dollar was worth 350 yen at that point.
Oh yeah.
So
a lot of vinyl figures.
Oh
yeah.
my God.
And thanks for that, Nixon. Taking the dollar off the gold standard, you son of a. So Yokoyama did this he had several popular ninja comics, manga, and he had this one show called Masked Ninja, the Red Shadow, or Red Shadow, the Masked Ninja. And it is got all kinds of crazy stuff in it. And the TV show is the only thing I can describe it as. It's Batman 66 with ninjas and monsters.
Wow. Sounds like the greatest show ever made.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with this.
Yeah, it's in color. They broke it up into 13. They did, I think it was 52 episode show, but each story arc is 13 episodes. There's like different band of villains every 13 episodes. And it's three main characters, Red Shadow, Blue Shadow, and White Shadow, who travel around trying to defeat these subversive organizations that are trying to overthrow Japan. And some of the villains are these outrageous comic booky, some guys have fangs and they have blue skin, and they're not aliens. They're just like these like demons or supernatural kind of beings.
Weird dude.
because of using ninjutsu magic.
There you go. That's all I need. That's all I need.
Right? And it's like insane. And it's also got, so it's Batman 66, ninjas, kaiju, and Wild Wild West, because it has anachronistic stuff. Like it has ninjas using snorkel gear in aqualungs. But everything's done stylized. It's not the Irwin Allen school of just put it on the guy and it'll look okay. It was like they did like these sort of retro future steampunk kind of versions of. There's a lot of steampunk in it. There's one of the bad guys is a giant globe that flies around. That's their conveyance. It's a flying globe. It's how they get the place to place. It's a steel globe with big rivets in it.
Oh my God.
I need to have this show.
August, was this ever translated and brought to America, or
kind of. Well, what happened was the show was popular all throughout Asia. So what happened was Toei Studios said, well, we're going to take 3 of the story arcs and we're going to cut them into movies. We're going to do like the kind of abridge these 13 episodes into a movie. And they released them all over Asia. A couple of them leaked over here into the video market. One of them is called Ninja Scope. So there was a guy named William Ross that went also by the name Bill Ross, who was he started a film dubbing company. He was a Marine, retired in Japan, and he started a dubbing company because the Japanese film industry was taking off, and they were selling films overseas. And he just said, "Hey, I'll dub your films, Toei, Toho, whoever." And he dubbed a lot of those films in Tokyo, and he dubbed TV series with hundreds of episodes too, like this show called The Samurai, which was called Secret Samurai in Japan, but it was exported because it was dubbed to Australia and became the biggest hit in Australia in the 60s.
No way.
It was bigger than Star Trek and Doctor Who in Australia.
You're kidding.
No, and they, in fact, it was so big they brought the actors over to do personal appearances in Japan, and they were greeted. They were greeted at, I don't know if it was Adelaide Airport. I can't remember specifically which airport it was, but the airport they pulled into had a bigger crowd than the Beatles.
No way.
And they put on a huge ninja show, like with stunt work and wires. And it was the biggest show in Australia. And there's episodes of the dubbed version on YouTube. It's called The Samurai. And they produced something like there's 140 episodes of that show. And it was huge. And then they followed up with another show that was set in the modern era called, in Japan, it's called Ninja Squad Moonlight. But when it was dubbed by William Ross again, they changed the title to Phantom Agents. And Phantom Agents actually played on New York television in 1966. For about 6 months. It only lasted about 6 months and disappeared. And back in the early 90s, when I was doing this magazine called Markalite, somebody passed on my home phone number to this guy who called me up and was going, "I'm trying to find Phantom Agents." And I hadn't heard of Phantom Agents yet. I knew of Ninja Squad Moonlight, but I didn't know it was imported to America or that it was dubbed or anywhere else it was imported to. It went to Australia and became the second big hit in Australia. There's 160 episodes and 2 feature films made of that production. It's kind of like The Man from U.N.C.L.E., but if they were ninjas, James Bondian kind of thing.
Perfect.
This guy calls me up and he's like trying to find episodes. I don't know what to tell him. And he got a little brusque. And it turned out to be, and the guy was Steve James, American martial arts film actor who passed away years ago. It's like, "I'm going to get you, sucker." And
sure.
Okay, yeah.
He goes, "I'm looking for this show. I saw it when I was a kid, man. You got to help me find the episodes." And I was like, "I don't know what the hell you're talking about, man." And that's the first time I heard Phantom Agents was from him. So that was another show that's sort of kind of in that milieu of tokusatsu. There's no monsters in it, but they use special film techniques because that's the basic breakdown of that word. Is it's a portmanteau.
Right.
Portmanteau. Portmanteau, Manitou on the back. Burgess Meredith in the corner. Tony Curtis is
Michael
tripping out.
and Sarah. Yeah.
Oh, geez, yeah. So it's a portmanteau of the old Japanese term for trick photography, which is a special shooting. And so they married those two words together, and that was married by the Japanese press because they kept having to write out the full term. Right. So it was around 1962, early 60s, that term was coined, tokusatsu, and it just is an abbreviation for special effects photography, and that means movies and TV shows or whatever that are use a preponderance or a heavy use of special effects miniature photography. It's a non-genre specific term. A lot of people think it's just about science fiction or superheroes and monsters, but it's not. It just simply means special photography, special effects.
Right.
And that includes like war movies, Japanese war epics, like Tora would be considered. The Japanese have made movies just like Tora. Lots of miniature special effects about World War II. Right. And those are under the brand of tokusatsu. That includes any kind of movie with lots of special effects in it, even though the movie wouldn't be considered a fantasy film.
Right.
Okay.
Well, thanks for setting the record straight, August.
So it's a medium. It's not a genre.
But you would say though that these days when someone says tokusatsu, most people think of science fiction or fantasy.
Right. Well, a lot of it. That's what happens with Japanese words, pop culture words, when they come into common use in America, because there's a gap of misunderstanding about the language itself.
Always.
It's sort of like there was a lot of that done within anime fandom in the 80s and 90s. as well. But yeah, but you can't really change the Japanese term that's already been solidified. And there's subcategories. So you have Tokusatsu hero. So that's the blanket for all the superhero stuff. Okay. And then under that, you have Kyodai hero, giant heroes. And then you have Henshin heroes, which are transforming heroes like Kamen Rider and Kikaida. Yeah. And then there's different categories. There's all the Japanese
like the metal heroes.
Right. The metal heroes fall under, Henshin heroes because they transform.
Okay.
Right. So, the Japanese have already in Japanese fandom. It's pretty much Japanese fandom already delineated all of these terms 40 years ago.
Right.
Wow. So the Americans haven't adapted it because there's also the American fandom is largely, they don't speak or read Japanese. That's kind of like there's missing experience. So sometimes when Japanese fans try to communicate with some American fans, there's some gaps. There's some gaps that either side doesn't get. The Japanese get a little frustrated that, why are you calling that Tokusatsu?
Well, I want to apologize in advance.
No, you don't have to.
We as a group would like to apologize to Japan.
I love it. I love it all.
We also enjoy Tora. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Tsuburaya, I know he did a lot of special effects work on these war movies. And the story goes that there was one scene, I think it was Pearl Harbor, where he recreated Pearl Harbor and it fooled Americans into thinking it was actual footage, or?
Well, there's the sort of the legend in the actual story. So during the war, as all governments do, they asked the studios to do their part and produce propaganda.
Yeah.
So they were having Toho Studios and some of the other studios make movies about the war in the Pacific and the war in China, showing how well they were doing. And so there was this one film that was ordered that was called The War at Sea from Hawaii to Malaya, which was released not long after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And after the war, when the American occupation came in, Tsuburaya was blacklisted from Toho Studios because they had known about this film, and they said the only way that he could have recreated Pearl Harbor in such minute detail was that he must have been a spy.
Wow.
Or been part of a spy ring. And he's like, they gave me the stuff. The government gave me all that and said, make this or we'd shoot you.
Wow.
If it wasn't like, Frank Capra, Capra didn't get threatened to be shot in the head, So,
right.
No.
But, it's like, little Adolf and, Tojo were like, hey,
let's go.
You're gonna make this movie or we're gonna shoot this dog, So, they were forced to make these movies. And so Tsuburaya went, okay. And he got a Japanese film award for the miniature work in that film. But he was kind of a pacifist, really. He was drafted in the war in China early on, but at this point in the 40s, he was already in his 40s, so he didn't have to serve anymore.
Right.
So they just keep making. They made him make a bunch of war movies. They're going, you're really great with miniatures, and you're going to do aerial battles, and then the biggest one was the War at Sea from Hawaii Malaya. So there was some story that was out there, some legend that got out into the American media at some point where it said somebody saw the film during the occupation, an American at the GHQ, General Headquarters, and they were convinced it was documentary footage, that the mini. But if you watch it now, even if you watched it in the 50s, you would go, well, you could tell where the miniatures are, just like a Hollywood picture. Right. It's like watching a Lydecker. The Lydecker brothers do their stuff. At first, at first you'll go like, "Wow, that's awesome." You go, "That has to be a miniature,"
right?
Because it's just so awesome of a shot.
Right.
That building blew up real good. So
and Manda taking out a sub.
Yeah, clear. That happens. Like it was filmed on location in the Mu Empire.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Did Ishiro Honda ever work with Tsuburaya before Godzilla, directing any of these movies?
No. In fact, what happened was at the studio when Honda was in the director's program, he had a guy that was his junior in that directing program under a main director that was training them called Kajiro Yamamoto, who later made the War at Sea from Hawaii to Malaya. But that other the junior to Honda was Kurosawa. And what happened was Honda came from basically kind of a upper middle class working family.
Mm-hmm.
And so he got drafted, and Kurosawa was from a family that was a little more well off. So he didn't get drafted.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, I was always under the impression that Honda was a junior to Kurosawa.
No, that was the other way around. Yeah, it was the other way around.
Interesting.
Yeah. So when Honda came back, Kurosawa had exceeded him.
Wow.
Yeah, Kurosawa stayed behind and kept making movies at Toho.
Gotcha.
Got it.
So Honda was drafted, didn't lose a man in his platoon in Manchuria, came back. Some of his war nightmares and experiences when he was making films with Kurosawa towards the end of their lives, when he made a movie called Dreams, which is definitely a fantasy film. They're all like based on Kurosawa, the dreams that Kurosawa had.
Mm-hmm.
And Martin Scorsese's in that film playing Vincent van Gogh in one dream sequence. And Scorsese and a couple other guys helped produce that movie and get it shown in the States as well. But there's a segment called The Tunnel, and it's about a soldier who lost his entire platoon. And he's coming back home, and he was released as a POW, and he has to walk through this long, dark tunnel to get to his hometown. And when he goes into the tunnel, he is greeted by his platoon. And when Kurosawa came up with this idea, because he didn't experience the war himself at all, he said, "This is for you, Honda." And Honda directed that entire sequence of that film.
Wow.
And is he credited?
Not technically.
Okay.
He's listed as, I believe, I don't know the exact nomenclature, but he was like kind of listed as assistant director.
Okay.
Like as an AD, like a first AD or whatever. But Kurosawa said publicly that it was more like we were co-directors.
I see.
On all those films from Kagemusha, all the way to Rhapsody in August and Not Yet, Mada Dayo, the last one they did. He said that on these films we're directing together.
Okay.
Basically, but Kurosawa had the bigger name, so Kurosawa was getting the lion's share of the director's credit. But he said the relationship was more like we're co-directing these films.
Cool.
That's cool.
Hey, August, really quickly, I know Kurosawa, his name is really well known within the film community, and maybe Honda's isn't not as much. Was Honda looked down upon because, that's like kiddie films or something like that? Or was there still respect?
Well, now there is, now there's a lot more, but when these films were made, let's say the original Godzilla, like Honda had only done a documentary and he did a movie about pearl divers. He did a couple of small kind of like, working class dramas. And, then he gets Godzilla, and immediately had been no film like this produced in Japan at that point, like the original Godzilla. Film critics are the same all over. They're all snobs, They're all, especially back in that time, the 50s, 60s, 70s, you had a lot of people who were very snobbish about what they felt was true cinema and what wasn't cinema. And they called Godzilla garbage. One of them called it trash. It's called garbage.
The Japanese critics.
One Japanese critic said,
"Are you serious?"
One Japanese critic basically said the film looked like something that you regurgitated.
You're kidding.
Wow.
But meanwhile, while these stodgy film critics were laying these bad reviews, which Honda considered hilarious, because at the same time, the first film connected with Japanese audiences so much, you had like a Star Wars experience happen.
Yes.
It was a huge, huge hit. Lines around the block, people queuing up night and day to see this film. And the public decided that this was a hit.
Yeah.
And damn the critics. And the average moviegoer wasn't reading these Japanese cinema journals that the reviewers wrote in anyway. Yeah. So a lot of these films got panned, but then they became populist pictures.
Right.
And then you had King Kong versus Godzilla in 1962, which was the highest ticket selling film I think it has the highest numbers of ticket sales.
Right.
And then it was re-released. It was released in Japan in 62. It was re-released in 64, and then again in 67. It had 2 re-releases. Then it was re-released in the 70s in a shorter version as part of a kiddie matinee package twice, I think. And then it was re-released to capitalize on Dino's Kong.
Yes.
Well, in 77. So that movie had a lot of legs. So these movies became populist cinema. I mean, you go immediately look at that period where you had, Godzilla. Immediately you have Gigantus or Godzilla Raids Again come out within 6 months of Godzilla's release.
Yeah, right.
They rushed that through. You had Honda and Tsuburaya working on Half Human, what we know as Half Human, or the abominable Snowman, comes out in Japan.
Right.
And then you go into Rodan and the Mysterians and
get into it.
Right. So there's also this sort of like mythology about these films in America where, the films were like laughed at and people really didn't like them. And they were considered garbage when they came out here back in the 50s and 60s. But the fact of the matter is it's absolutely the opposite. These movies, they were bankable. Now, while critics didn't like them and some audiences would go, oh, this is garbage. It's just, a guy in a suit. You still had like Variety gave it sort of a half-hearted, the effects are startling, but the movie itself is for the Burr version of King of Monsters. But then Rodan came along and that blew everybody away. Mm-hmm. That was the highest earning, the highest box office grossing science fiction film of 1957 in the United States.
Really?
Yeah.
Rodan?
The miniatures in that are amazing.
I love that.
Because it's in color, because it's
beautiful,
the detail
color.
is incredible. And I still love that design of that.
And the miniatures,
Rodan.
as you were saying, the miniatures are outstanding.
And you look at all the other films that were released in 57. So you have like, wow, it went up against the Giant Claw. It went up against Earth versus the Flying Saucers, I believe, was Earth
That's
versus
a great movie.
56 or 57. There was like one. It was either 20 Million Miles to Earth or Earth versus the Flying Saucers. One was 56, one was 57, I believe.
Right.
So send in your letters of complaint, folks. And I couldn't quite remember that.
No, it was in good company. For the most part, but still, it was
And then in 56 you had Forbidden Planet come out. Yeah. So Rodan was just a huge hit. It really appealed. I've read reviews from the period, like in San Francisco newspapers and a couple other newspapers, which said the movie was terrific. People would go like, "This is a really good picture." So it's kind of contrary to the reviews that were more commonly distributed through earlier books that we grew up reading, books by guys like Jeff Robin or whatever. And they would go to their library and look up reviews, but they would find a couple of reviews that they wanted to use, and that's what they used. And I found positive reviews for some of these films. And in fact, somebody retroactively was trying to say, I bet American critics had no idea that, King Kong versus Godzilla was kind of a satire in Japan. It was filmed as a satire. Right. And it kind of was a satire on over commercialization and the mad world of advertising and promotion. Yeah. And so it was kind of a play on that. And it was a movie sort of with 3 of the stars of the movie are common actors, comedians that would appear in working class office comedies.
Oh,
right.
So it's kind of like, Abbott and Costello beat King Kong versus Godzilla. You had
Yeah. There was a lot missing in the translation. Yeah.
Right. And the guy who was the boss of the advertising department of Pacific Pharmaceuticals, Mr. Taco, the wiry guy with the mustache,
goofy guy.
He was considered the Japanese Chaplin during his career.
Wow.
So, and then the two leads were basically a Japanese equivalent of Abbott and Costello, Tadao Takashima and Yu Fujiki. They did a lot of comedies together. And then they did Godzilla vs. the Thing the next year they used Yu Fujiki, but they didn't use Takashima. They used Akira Takarada, and they used Fujiki as kind of like the comic relief in that picture. And then the same 2 leads from King Kong versus Godzilla are in Atragon, which is a straight-laced picture, but they have some lighthearted play going on between them.
Hey, August, really quickly with Godzilla versus King Kong, the rumor of there's a different ending for American version and the Japanese. Was that true with the translation, or is it just not true?
It's not true at all. Yeah. And that myth was started. That myth was started by Uncle Fori.
Fori.
Oh yeah, so I remember it vaguely.
I remember reading that. August, and I always I gotta see the Japanese version. Because I just assumed that I'm seeing the American version.
Well, you're still seeing a better version if you see the Japanese version. It's a better film.
Right.
And it doesn't have music from House of Frankenstein in it, or it's all it's the full Ifukube score and all that, and a lot of really great scenes that aren't in the American version. But anyway, with that rumor, the funny thing was that it appeared in the pages of Spaceman or Spaceman magazine, the offshoot, the Warren offshoot, for science. How did Fori say that? Science fiction films.
Fiction, yes.
Yeah, science fiction films, because they didn't want to run that article in Famous Monsters, because Fori wasn't a big fan of the Japanese movies himself. He didn't. That's why they didn't get a lot of coverage. And then there was one article about, they did a roundup of bad movies before you had that whole bad movie movement in the late 70s.
Like the Medved brothers and all those.
Golden Turkey.
Sure.
And it became like the hip thing,
Yeah, and there was an article in a Famous Monsters issue in the early to mid 60s, early 60s, I think it was. Had to have been early 60s. I can't remember the number right now, but it was like I'm supposed to. It's issue number March 1962. And that issue had an article called Dante's Inferno. And it was about terrible movies.
Oh, Joe Dante wrote, right?
Oh, did he actually? He didn't have a byline, but it might have been Joe.
I think it may have been Joe Dante. I know he did some kind of thing where he contributed, I think.
Yeah, but that's something I would like to know.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, the bottom line was that they picked Gigantus the Fire Monster as a bad movie. And that's where another Godzilla rumor that perpetuated a myth, a bad thing that got perpetuated for years, that was hard to dispel, started with that article where they called the monster that Godzilla fights in that movie. They go, it's Godzilla and Anzilla instead of Anguilas. The origin of that gap is in that issue of Famous Monsters and that particular article. Because some kids recently were on Twitter, some kids, and I mean,
those kids,
they're in their 20, those darn kids, and they were going like, look, there's a TV listing on for Stars TV or something, Gigantus the Fire Monster, but it's Godzilla raids again because we're not circulating Gigantus,
right?
And it used that old synopsis from the old, like somebody had an old issue of the TV Guide or
TV Week.
Or one of those books. But anyway, it said Godzilla fights Anzilla. So these kids were on Twitter going, where did they come up with this?
That's hilarious.
How did they make this mistake? And I went, it was in this issue of FM.
Before you were born.
It was in this issue of FM. I go, here's the cover. Here's the page. I circled the review for you. And here it is. And
it's
the
like
kids, and it just, what happens is they go, well, how did that happen? I go, well, some guy who writes a book goes through issues of Famous Monsters in his research, finds that, perpetuates that into his book. Other writers come out with their own books on fantasy films, and then they have that book in their collection or in their bibliography, and they perpetuate that same myth because there was no way to fact check that with a Japanese database.
Yeah. Well, it's like Minya. At some point, somebody dubbed Minya Tadzilla. Minya was never called Tadzilla, but
that was Fori again.
That was Fori. Okay.
Because I thought it was Minya-san and also Baby Tad, and I got that from the pages of FM. So is he never called Baby?
Don't
Tad?
Believe that.
No,
don't believe that guy.
No, don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. It's like Bob, Tadzilla, Carol, and Alice. It's like.
I am just.
I want to see that movie.
I'm just crushed. I feel like I've been living a lie all my life.
But wait a minute. Hold on now. So is it Minya or is it Manila?
Right. See, that's why they changed it to Minya, because people couldn't understand or they didn't hyphenate it. They didn't emphasize it.
Yeah, manila envelope. Like, what is it?
It's not manila envelope.
Yeah.
People think of
Manila.
the Philippines or something.
Okay, here's the real story.
That's what I want.
Here we go.
Here's the expose.
Strap yourselves in.
It's gonna be a bumpy night, boys. Babs tells all. So what happens is that in Son of Godzilla, the main character played by Kira Kubo is the young writer. Goes, I had a stomach ache. It told me there was a story on this island. I knew that there was something going on here. So, they've got these monsters running around the island. They got the mantises. The scientists that are there don't even bother calling them names. They're just like, they're freaking big mantises. Yeah. So, the writer, the character of the writer in the movie comes up with this name in the English dub, Gigantus, right? In the Japanese version, they're called Kamakiras, or Kamakiras, because that comes from Kamakiri, which in Japanese, Kamakiri is a mantis.
Okay.
Okay. So it's basically he did a play on a mantis.
Makes sense.
So once the egg hatches, he witnesses it goes, it looks like a baby Godzilla. So he comes up with the name Minila.
Okay.
Minila.
So it'd be like, or maybe they should have just did Mini Jira.
Or Minizilla.
Minizilla would have been another translation.
Right.
They could have done or a transliteration. But so the American distributors, when they did the Godzilla's Revenge, they went, no, the dubbers are going, Manila. So they just went, we're going to change it to something you can all pronounce, Minya. There you go. Minya. That's basically how
was that the Tetra Studios, whatever it's called?
No, that was done by Henry Shapperstein, who had
okay.
And probably his dubbing team, which was S. Richard Crown, I think, was the dubber for the UPA Shapperstein pictures, which Monster Zero and Gargantuas and all that.
Right,
and then,
right.
But Minya has a kind of a spark to it. I like
it. Does.
Minya.
Yeah,
it does.
Me too.
Even if it's wrong, it sounds right.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, if they're looking at the script. How do I read this now? Manila? What? Me? Yeah. Okay.
Vanilla.
No, think about it.
Somebody's gonna make fun of this name. Hey, Manila.
When they're recording the dubbing,
right?
These guys have to say the same name or word each time. You don't want to go, Minya-san, Minya-san, So it's got to be consistent.
It becomes like the Colonel Sanders doing the commercial,
Right.
This time the good one. My name Manu. Oh, shit.
God damn it. Right. So that's Godzilla, damn it. So they're all having this problem, so that's how a lot of those names got changed. It's like Ghidorah, King in Japan, it's King Ghidorah.
And do they always put the king in front? King?
They did from the beginning. Yeah, they did from the beginning.
King Ghidorah.
When Toho promoted that film overseas, they came up with their own advertising campaign, to sell these. Like you go to Cannes Film Festival and you have a booth and you have all this stuff and it's got to be in English or other languages. So they already had shortened the monster's name just to Ghidorah for overseas with the O in there. But if you look at the breakdown of the word, here's where we go into the, etymology of the word. So
bring it on.
Ghidorah, the Dora, so the Dora of Ghidorah, right, is a Japanese phonetic pronunciation, reading of the first three letters of dragon. Dora should be draw. So when they changed it to Ghidra for the American version, they were correct in contracting that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it should have been like GHI and then draw from dragon.
Ghidra.
Yeah. Right.
Ghidra.
So, but anyway, everybody Toho's trademarked it, and we all have to brand it, and they've rebranded it, and we all have to call it. We all have to conform to Ghidorah now. So whatever.
Well, and Rodan was in Japan was Radon. Right. They were reversed.
Yeah, and that was changed because by the American distributors, King Brothers, not by Toho. As far as I know, someone could correct me. I could be wrong on that one.
No,
I doubt it.
I doubt it.
There was a confusion between RADON, Radon, and Radon.
Radon. Yeah.
Radon.
Oh,
Radon,
the,
the radioactive element that could be found in the foundation of your home, which became a prominent problem in the 50s.
Yeah, like asbestos.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
So
you
they
know,
want that negative connotation, right?
Yeah.
Right. So it was like the confusion over how to pronounce it,
Right.
and that people would go, "What? Who wants to go see a movie about radioactive rocks that are in your foundation?"
Yeah.
What is this, monolith monsters? Come on.
If there's ninjas in it, maybe.
Yeah, and then people start blaming Rodin for
Right, exactly.
And there's lawsuits. And
I got lung cancer from Rodin the Flying Monster.
You know what he put in the foundation of my home? You will not believe this because it's not true.
You'd never believe it if I told you it was true. And so a lot of Japanese fans will ask me, why did they change it? Why did they change the name from Radon to Rodan?
Right.
And I go, well, it's because it sounds like Raiden, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And they kind of go, oh, okay, whatever. Because the Japanese name is also a play on Pteranodon.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
So it comes out of Pteranodon.
See, it's not a whatever. This is setting the record straight.
No, it's great. It's great.
I want the truth.
But with Godzilla movies and this type of cinema and all these giant kaiju films,
right?
It seemed like somebody like Hiro Nakajima, it was only until the latter part of his life that he really became a rediscovered star.
Right.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And so in Japan, were these movies like, hey, we loved them, but the minute we became 16, it was all in the past.
Well, there was a huge resurgence of interest in these films in the late 70s.
Yeah, right.
And among late teenagers and college students who grew up with watching them, it kickstarted this whole revival that is continuing to this day. But it was pretty huge, and it reached a peak in the early 80s with bringing back Godzilla in a film. But it did have this like serious. That's when the serious research started, because everything before that was relegated to like kids magazines, and kids books, and this is now they're going out and interviewing Honda and Super.
Right.
I mean, the press did in the past when these films were new,
right.
But now it was the fans becoming the journalists. And going out and meeting these people. And it wasn't just a very niche market. It was a very, very popular revival that had happened.
Right.
And that was across the board with the Ultraman shows, the Godzilla films. They all kind of started overlapping. The original like Toei hero TV shows like Kamen Rider, all that stuff.
That's just because Toei, like it seems like between Tsuburaya and Toei alone, like the sheer amount and volume of shows. So that's one thing I want to.
I mean,
but that's what I'm so curious about. August is like, I still can't even comprehend or wrap my head around how many TV shows of giant superheroes or Kamen Rider type shows were during the 60s and 70s and 80s. Even like, I assume that they were the prominent productions. I mean, as opposed to like a Japanese drama or a musical or a comedy, was the bulk of the production in all of the Japan TV industry tokusatsu? Like it seemed to be. To me,
not
to us.
There's so much.
Yeah, there was a lot, man. There was way. Funny you should ask that because I have numbers. Like
how many production companies are making shows at the same time? Must have been like
let's hear the numbers.
Yeah, so here's the little background on that, right? So Ultraman comes out in the late 60s. It creates a bit of an explosion. Ultra Q Ultraman, and then the Ultra 7 follows suit. Tsuburaya Production says, we want to do other stuff. We don't want to keep making this superhero giant monster stuff. We want to explore other things. So they do other types of programs. They do a thing called Operation Mystery, which is kind of like it's kind of like Cold Shack meets Mission Impossible.
Yeah, it's great.
And they do shows like that. They did an espionage spy thing with Super Science, which was an idea that was supposed to be a spin-off of Atragon as a feature film that became a series called Mighty Jack in the late 70s.
Mighty Jack, yeah.
And that started off as a spin-off of Atragon for the mid-60s. It was supposed to be produced as a film in 66. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. But you had these things coming out. Then you had the reruns. So then you had, in the late 60s, Moonlight Mask, all the old black and white action, adventure, hero guys in costume shows come back. And there were several. There's like, the amazing Harimao and Moonlight Mask and other guys like a 7 Spectrum Mask, like another masked hero. That kind of had a revival to a new generation. The Ultraman shows got reran and became popular again, started a resurgence. So they were plotting, a lot of the networks were saying, well, these reruns are doing really good. So why don't we just start producing newer shows now? And so they brought back, in 1971, you had the premiere of, just at the top of the year in the first quarter, you had Spectreman, premiered in January. Then you had, it was followed up by Return of Ultraman, which was a brand new show for 1971. And then you had Kamen Rider, the original Kamen Rider series.
Right.
They all followed it. They were all in the first quarter, and it created a huge boom. And which first was going to be called the second monster boom, the media started calling it, because most of Spectreman and Return of Ultraman dealt with giant monsters.
Right.
But then Kamen Rider was the oddball show. It was the underdog that actually blew up much bigger than those other two shows.
One of my favorite shows of all time.
He wasn't a giant hero, though.
I love Kamen Rider so much because it feels like it's the local kids got together and said, let's put on a show, and I got a costume I can make, and and we'll give me $100 and I'll create an evil genius's lair, and it moves. Right. And there's groovy guys and groovy girls and motorcycles and stuff.
It was like
and it's so very different from Ultraman.
Right. Yeah. And
the
network.
Yeah, it's funny when we went to Japan and we went on that studio tour, and then we saw the Kamen Rider and all those other costumes from all those other figures. We were like blown away.
Right.
And they're brutal. They're violent.
Yeah, there was very, very different permissible things on children's television in Japan.
Yeah, and the monsters had a little bit. The monsters a lot of times had a little bit more detail and grittiness to them, kind of like. They were still kind of your rubber suit monsters, but there's something different about them. They were
they were strange. My favorite thing about Kamen Rider was that, so you see the first episode and the suit looks pretty good. It's all right, but then like by episode 2, it's trashed and like there's paint peeling off of it. And it's just like, but I love it. I'm like, of course he's been in 9 fights.
Right.
But also
there was a thing that was being done during the production. I mean, that production was, hitting the ground running. They were going, here's the budget. This is what you got to work with. Go make this show. And the guy who designed the monsters and the hero and came up with the basis of the story there was a think tank, but the main guy, they wanted to put a name in conjunction to release the manga and also to connect the show with a known name. A sellable name was Shotaro Ishimori. Who created Cyborg 009.
All kinds of shows, just all over the place. Yeah.
Cyborg 009 is kind of his life work, but which was the first proto, cybernetic hero, which basically Kamen Rider is an updated version of Cyborg 009. It's a human against his will, forced to become a cybernetic bad guy, a weapon, but then is rescued before he can be brainwashed. So now he can fight for humanity. So
is that the colorful guy with the see-through helm half?
No, that's Kikaida.
That's Kikaida. Yeah.
Kikaida.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was also created by
Cyborg. Right, but Cyborg 009, they're all humans. They just have a costume that they wear.
Okay.
And they have scarves like Kamen Rider. That's where the scarves came from.
And then they were originally that anime was black and white.
Yeah, the first anime of there was the 2 feature films that were hour-long theatrical featurettes were in color. Then the series started in '68, and that was black and white, a black and white series. Then they did a second series in '79, which was color, which was shown in the United States with English subtitles in New York and a couple other, I think Los Angeles. They had it subtitled, and somebody was smart enough to re-subtitle them and upload them for downloads recently.
Oh, nice. Yes.
It's great. It's a great show. But anyway,
I love the show.
The Cyborg 009 guys don't wear masks. It's their actual faces. But they're basically walking weapons. Like one guy's arm, he pulls his forearm off and it's a gun underneath. And one guy's got rockets in his legs,
Yeah,
so,
sure.
Cool.
So Kamen Rider is kind of on that same theme. And with Kamen Rider, all the villains, the monsters are basically, or like I call them mutants, because what they are is genetically spliced humans with a plant, animal, or mineral, or whatever, right? And then they're augmented by cybernetics.
Right.
So you'll have a guy that looks like he stands like a human, but he's a snake, he's a cobra, but he's got a machine gun in his arm.
Sure.
Of course.
Oh,
Yeah.
So just
And
totally wild.
there's like a cactus man, and there's
Yeah, just the most insane, outlandish stuff.
My favorite was from Kamen Rider V3, where it's the turtle with the cannon on its back.
Turtle bazooka. Yeah.
Turtle bazooka.
From the first 2 episodes of the show. That's great.
His Christian name, I believe.
Yes.
What was the Bat Frankenstein? What was that?
Yeah, that was
Kamen Rider X.
Yeah, that was in the theatrical featurette. 5 Riders versus King Dark. It was only shown in theaters. And the great thing is, like, these shows were imported to Hawaii by a local Japanese station that ran stuff with English subtitles, and it blew up in Hawaii in the mid-'70s.
Right, because Kaiju was really popular in Hawaii, right?
Yeah, well, and then they brought over all those theatrical films like Kamen Rider X versus King Dark with Frankenbat. They've got him in that. Because he's called, the character's called Franken-Komori. And Komori means bat, and Franken is from Frankenstein, so Frankenbat.
That's insane.
But then there's also Starfish Hitler.
No. Are you serious?
Yeah.
There's a Starfish Hitler.
That's my alias
Which
name.
show was that one in
Starfish
again?
Hitler.
That's Kamen Rider X as well.
That was Kamen Rider X. Okay.
But then they were genetically split. They only really started explaining any of it anymore. They just kind of introduced these characters. But they did one called, you pronounce it in Japanese and it's a play on words, right? So there was a character in Kamen Rider X called Adi Capone. Adi Capone.
Okay.
So Adi or
like Ali,
like Ali Capone. So what it was Al Capone.
Okay, sure.
But Adi in Japanese means ant. The Ant Capone. It's like an ant. And they did this weird thing where he's got like a jacket and he's got a top hat. I don't know why he's wearing a silk top hat.
Because he's fancy.
And he's got a Tommy gun. But he's wearing a vest and it's a map of Chicago and it says Chicago in English on it.
Wow.
I mean, I love this stuff.
You can't. I mean, it's like a fever dream.
Yeah, there's in Kamen Rider Amazon, which one of my favorite designs, by the way.
Yes.
There is a character that is, and I believe, no, maybe this is, you tell me. I can't remember if it's V3 or Amazon, but what was the one with, it's TV Fly?
Yeah, that's V3. That's from V3.
V3. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I remember Matt gave me a figure of that character for like my birthday or Christmas or something. Yeah,
it delights me. It's a fly with TV eyes. I mean,
so they basically splice the fly with the human being, and then his head is two television sets basically.
Yeah,
but they're like for his eyes, but he hypnotizes people.
Yeah,
right. He sends out a hypnotic wave. But it's kind of genius because you think about it, because people would say that television just brainwashes people, and it literally happens in this show.
Well, think about it. Don't you remember when we were kids? Our parents would say to you, "We don't want you watching television all the time.
Don't sit too close to TV Fly."
Remember?
No, don't. 6 feet.
August, my parents drew a line in chalk to keep
from
us
TV Fly.
Far from the TV because of the radiation or something, and they didn't want us. They didn't want us to watch that much TV. If they came home and they saw us watching TV, they turned the TV off because they thought it was brainwashing us.
Yeah, that's the 70s version of G5 is in my the G5 is in my Moderna shot. It
just seems like back at its peak during that time, like every factory or production company was making monster suits. Like, it just seemed
it was pretty crazy. I mean, CBS News it was so huge in Japan and creating such a fuss in Hawaii that CBS News had their Tokyo branch going on the set of Ultraman Taro, which is a 1973 show. And they go, here's how these shows are being made. They're the craze of Japanese television, but they're too violent for America.
Right.
No.
And I didn't see it.
Too violent for America.
Right.
Let that one settle.
Yeah. Well, for American children's television at the time, which was pretty much locked down to sanitized.
Yeah, it's true. Like
but the
Super
thing was,
Friends helping people swim and stuff.
Right.
You know?
No, I was like, I had friends at school the next day go, "Did you see the thing with Ultraman on Channel 5 News?" I'm like, "What?" And I bugged me and they tell me everything, describe the whole thing for me. And I couldn't see this, and I was frustrated for many years. And then in the 80s, CBS News put together these shows looking back on their news files. And then they did they had Honda, a thing with Honda that they had recorded.
Wow.
But then there was about Godzilla coming back from the late 70s. This was in the mid 80s. But then there was a TV show that CBS produced about science fiction, how it's because, Star Wars and Alien and all that stuff.
Right.
I mean, this huge thing around the world. And they produced this hour-long special. And then they showed a segment from that news footage they shot for that CBS story. And they showed them like these guys calling one of the monster suits from Ultraman Toho. And I'm going, there's the footage. This was real. This was a real report.
Wow.
And then I've also found some newspaper articles that echoed that from the same time, that were saying these things were too violent. In Hawaii, when these shows exploded literally on television there in 74, 75,
Right.
there were adults, magazine columns, clergymen that were saying these shows are, going to mess up the youth of Hawaii. And they should, but they just kept showing them. The shows got bigger, and they brought the actors over from Japan, and they did stage shows, and these things blew up. And they had so many shows on. There would be like a weekend night. You could see 3 or 4 of these shows in one weekend night, and then you could see them on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, and it repeats on Tuesday. And
it truly is a paradise.
It was,
but also with the sheer number of productions of TV shows being made, but this is also before cable and internet. So it seems to me like if you're living in Japan at the time, there'd be like wall-to-wall 24 hours of there's nothing but Kaiju and Ultraman shows. Was there room for anything else?
Yeah, time blocks, right? I mean,
oh yeah, well there were time blocks on all the networks. All the networks wanted their own Kamen Rider, their own Ultraman show. Right. So when Kamen Rider, especially when Kamen Rider exploded, and especially in the latter part of 71, early 72, when they changed the tone of the show, because the first 13 episodes are kind of this dark kind of horror show,
right?
Very straight-faced. Then they decided, well, let's lighten it up, because the ratings weren't too good in the Osaka area. The Tokyo ratings were good, and they said, well, we got to get these ratings up. The network and the sponsors want the ratings to go up. So they played around with the formula, and they took off. And in fact, the most popular show on television at the time was Key Hunters, which I mentioned earlier, the spy show. So then the Japanese media started calling Kamen Rider, which was on, I believe, at like 7 o'clock in the evening. It was called 7 o'clock's Key Hunter, Kamen Rider, because it exploded. It really exploded in popularity. They added cute girls to the cast so the adults would watch and stuff like that. But that show took off. Everybody wanted their own show like it. It was cheaper to do a Kamen Rider type show than do an Ultraman type show, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
You're not having miniature sets, although there were more of those. So between 1971 and 1979, all right? Not 1980, between 71 and 79, there were 63, that's 60 plus 3 superhero shows on Japanese television. Live action.
No way.
Lord.
Oh my God.
And there's no real like American equivalent TV to that, right? I mean, yes, like in the 50s, you had lots of Westerns on TV, you had lots of shows in the 70s, but that's insane.
Yeah. And the peak year was 73. And then what happened was the oil crisis. And then which skyrocketed the production costs for any film and television show.
Okay.
Sure.
And these types of shows, to use tokusatsu, were even more expensive. So you see the reduction of the Ultraman type shows, or the budgets on the Ultraman type shows getting really pinched tighter and tighter. And then you see the mass proliferation of the Kamen Rider type show, where some of them got bigger budgets, and so they were able to do a more elaborate production on some of those. And also throw in their scenes of like cities blowing up, because the bad guys are really bad and have
Right.
They have more crap now to blow you up with.
What I liked in the original Kamen Rider series, so each episode would have their monster of the episode who was, he was like now in command of this new plan. And what I loved is that, so they had their main control room, the Shocker control room, and then the control room looked the same, except now it was painted in a motif that reflected the monster. So if it was like the cactus guy, it would be like a cactus painted all over the place. And I just, like, my mind goes to, oh, hey, we got a new guy. He's
Start changing.
painters out. You know?
It's like changing the carpet every time.
He's redecorated the office.
That's hilarious.
New boss, same as the old boss, but this was a cactus. Last week it was a lizard.
And then I always thought, like, what it must be like to be a Shocker combat man, you know, just like your daily life. You know what? I'm lucky if I live to see tomorrow.
Right.
My lifespan is about 3 days. I jump around, I say, ee, and then, you know, I blow up.
Yeah.
Hey, August, a quick question for you. I know that we've all been fortunate to meet Haruo Nakajima. That was like such a big thrill.
Right.
But when we met him, he was older. My understanding was, although this stuff was popular, the people who played these monsters or robots or whatever weren't necessarily considered to be stars. And that when he came to the United States for these conventions, I mean, he was treated like a god.
Right.
You know? And it was heartfelt for him to come here. And I think his daughter had mentioned something that this is like mind blowing, that people would love her father so much because he was the original Godzilla, or Akira Takarada, you know, when he showed up. Did they get the appreciation in their home country as much as the United States, or was it really just the United
States? It's different. It's very different. Back when those movies were made, like a lot of people would think, you know, like Nakajima and the guys in the suits who got no publicity back when they were making these things, and which is quite contrary. The magazines would feature, and I'm talking about movie magazines for the mass audience, the general public. Yeah, so these guys, you know, these guys actually got featured interviews in magazines and newspapers. Oh, okay. And Nakajima was called the Kaiju star.
Oh,
you know,
he was.
They did canonize and celebrate these guys. Even Mr. Furuya, Satoshi Furuya, plays Ultraman. His name was in the media back then. He's the guy, meet the man behind the rubber. You know.
Okay, this is good. Okay.
Yeah. So they were celebrated.
But were they aware? Maybe they weren't aware of the admiration they're getting in America until later.
Well, they had no idea, really. They didn't have no idea. When I brought over, for an example, it's not even the guys in the suits. I did an event with a group of people back in 2004. It was the 50th anniversary of Godzilla, and some guys that we had a little group we put together, and Toho was asking people around the country, if you can put on a Godzilla film festival in your local theater, do it. We'll make sure it's okay, and we're not going to come after you with lawyers. So we said, okay, we're going to do one. The Egyptian did one in May, and so we talked to some people there and said, well, let's do one, and we'll do it in November. November 54 was when Godzilla was released, November 3rd, 1954. So we'll do our event in San Francisco in 2004, November. So we put on this event, which kept growing. I went to the Castro Theater. We went to a couple different places, and we were kind of torn about where to put this on. The Roxy wanted it. Roxy Theater here in San Francisco wanted it really bad, but they're a small theater.
Yeah.
And I was like, we got to, and I was going, we should go to the Castro Theater because they're just like, it's a beautiful theater. They seat 1,404 people, 650 of that in the balcony. This would be a great show. And it's beautiful inside. It was renovated. It's been kept up by the original builders of the theater, the original family, the Nassers. And people are going, no, they're not going to want this. They're too snooty. They're too, they do all the pretentious film festivals. I go, I don't know. And then the booker at the time was Anita Manga, who's one of the main people with the Film Noir Foundation. And Anita was like, oh, I totally want to do this because my friend so-and-so at Film Forum in New York, they're doing a Godzilla thing. So what do you have to give me? So we decided to do this. It kept growing. I was thinking, who's going to want to see, a bunch of days of these movies? Let's just do it like a like a kind of a mini film festival convention type, was my basic idea to program it and to do like a 3-day event, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I think would be perfect. And we could do 2 different movies during the matinees, 2 different movies in the evening, or 2 different movies in the afternoon, 2 different movies in the evening. So we can get, the maximum amount of movies over those 3 days.
Sure.
And then Anita was like, well, that's not really enough days. And I'm like, are you serious? Are you serious? So she wanted to backtrack. So now we're doing Thursday, right?
Yeah.
And then we're doing Wednesday. And I'm like, okay. And then she's like, well, the film forum's doing these films like, and she goes, I think we need to have a bigger festival. I don't think 5 days is going to cut it. So then we had to add Monday and Tuesday.
You're kidding.
Wow.
And I was like, Anita, it's your theater. You're paying for all the film rentals. Okay, cool. But I want to pick all the films. And the only stipulation she had was that she wanted a couple of the non-Godzilla Toho pictures, right? So we ended up.
Oh,
so I of course I wanted to show Rodan and Gargantuas and Moth, the original Mothra, the Japanese version with English subtitles, because most people still hadn't seen it at that point. And Sony had that in the Columbia archives, and then Battle in Outer Space. We got that one in there too, because that's one of my faves. But anyway, so we do this event. We brought over this long. This long story is about, so we needed to have actors come over.
Yes.
So we were able, Nakajima had recently had a stroke at that time. He had a stroke, like I think in 2002. So everybody in Japan was like, you can't get him. He's too sick. He's never going to do any more public appearances, which didn't last long because we all know he did later.
Yes.
And I brought him to Monster Palooza in 2011. 10 years ago. 10 years ago.
We were there.
Yeah. 10 years ago next month, just, all a couple of weeks from now. Will be 10th year. Anyway, Nakajima was out of the picture. So we got Hiroshi Koizumi, who played the young professor in Mothra. He was also in Godzilla Raids Again. And Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster in Godzilla versus the Thing, playing the scientist in those pictures. He's in a bunch of other pictures as well. And then we got Akira Kubo, who had never been to America. Koizumi had been to America to a couple of kaiju cons that were staged in New York in the mid-'90s. But Kubo had never been invited to the United States before.
Wow.
So we were able to get Kubo, who, was the star of Matango, and he was in Monster Zero, and
Son of
the star Destroy All Monsters, and other pictures. So we're able to get him. And then we wanted, we definitely wanted to have a Godzilla actor. Godzilla suit actor. We got Kitagawa, who did, King Ghidorah in Mothra 3, the rebirth of Mothra 3. He did Final Wars, or as I affectionately call it, Final Warts.
Ooh. That's harsh. That's harsh.
But Kitagawa is the best thing about that movie next to Dawn Fry.
Dawn Fry.
And, oh my God! Stories about Dawn Fry I can't repeat to the public. When I got to hang out with that guy, the maniac. So we got Tomomi Kitagawa, who was Godzilla 2000 and as well, and Godzilla. He did a couple of the Godzillas in the late 90s, early 2000s. But anyway, so we booked these guys, and all of a sudden we get the added booking of Jerry Ito. Who played Nelson, the kidnapper in Mothra.
No.
Who's half Japanese, half American, and living in LA with his Japanese wife.
No way.
Yeah, living in LA. Nobody knew. Hardly anybody knew. He was invited
still involved with crime, or
he was off the crime by that time.
Okay.
And then here's an amazing thing for me, maybe. But then there was a guy that I met who was living in San Francisco, who a friend of mine called me up. This is early 90s. A friend of mine calls me up and goes, hey, man, there's this guy that comes into my dad's shop all the time. And he's like selling those, things like wooden coins with your company's name on it, the phone number, like, things you hand out to people instead of a business card, or get your pens with your company's name on it, or, they print menus and you know, blah, 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 blah.
Promotional items.
Right. So there was this guy who goes around to all these shops in San Francisco and he's like huckstering this stuff. He's an elderly guy. And he goes, yeah, he's telling me that, you know, he was in a bunch of Japanese movies and he was the mayor of Newkirk City in Mothra. And I go, GTFO. No way, man. And then I go, what's his name? He goes, Ed Keane. I go, it's him. It's him.
No. Wow.
Living in San Francisco since 1966.
Wow. No. They're all around us.
So I invited him. He actually during the 50s, he was in the military as an intelligence operator. He spoke Russian. He was in vaudeville where he learned to speak Russian as a child and sing in Russian. So he was hired by Japanese film companies to play Russians. He's in a Criterion Collection movie called The Human Condition, which is 3 movies that run over 7 hours. He plays a Russian officer that, you know, is going to kill Tetsuya Nakadai's character, the star of the 3 films. He's in that speaking Russian. He did Russian in a bunch of other movies. He did the Japanese-Russo War, which was fought in, like, was it 1917, where the Japanese sunk the Russian fleet. He played the commander of the main Russian flagship, and he told me these stories. And I worked at a bar, and he lived near the bar. And he would come in and sit and tell me all these stories about his time in Japan and working with John Ford. On The Barbarian and the Geisha, he provided photos. He's got photos with John Wayne.
Wow.
He said this the Russian battleship commander, he goes, all I did was stand there and go, Stoya, 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 which means fire, fire, fire. And he wrangled all the extras. So he started wrangling extras. And when he worked on The Barbarian and the Geisha in 1957, he was wrangling, they had him wrangle the extras. And so he said, you know, I think I can make money from doing this, because he got out of the military. He came back to the States, went to LA, kicked around LA, Little Tokyo, and San Francisco, Japantown. And he was just homesick. And so he said, I'm going to go back. And he went back to Japan, and then he ended up living there for, 10 or 12 more years, and then just doing movie work and running a talent agency, hiring foreigners to be in Japanese pictures. So they would give him the headshots and, and go, here, this company is going to pay you this much. And then they would give themselves jobs. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll get a piece of this movie too. I'm going to hire myself to be in this picture.
Sure. Why not?
It was him and this guy, this Turkish guy that was known by the name Osman Youssef, who is in almost every damn Japanese movie from the 50s and 60s. He's a big guy. He's got a big nose, like a kind of a doorknobby nose. And once you see him the first time, you go, that guy. And he and Keane ran this company together. Wow. Hiring these foreigners to appear in Japanese pictures. And so
is it still running? Because I'm available.
they've started plenty of other ones. You can go over there and sign up and go, I want to be in Japanese TV
Matt,
shows.
All right, I'm ready.
Yeah. Wow. And Ed Keane was amazing. We got Ed Keane to show up. So there was this reunion between Ed Keane and especially Hiroshi Koizumi, which they hadn't seen each other since Ed Keane left Japan in 1966. And they were socially hung out. There were social gatherings that happened with the actors and things that they would get invited to. And then Hiroshi Koizumi took me aside and it was at one point and said, you know what the rumor was? And it was him and his wife, who was a famous Japanese dancer back in the day. And they were going like, yeah, Ed Keane, man, everybody in the film community in Tokyo were like, he's an undercover agent for the American military. That was the rumor. And he was vetting Soviet spies in Tokyo.
Wow.
And which was really funny because 2 years earlier, Ed Keane comes by my bar and he was an avid reader. He goes, you know what the number one killer of old people is, seniors and old people? I'm like, what? He goes, television. He goes, they just sit in front of TV and they die. He goes, I go out every day. I walk every day. He goes, I became a vegetarian. He goes, and all I do is read. And I meet up with some other old guys and we hang out and bullshit.
Sounds great.
Right. And so Ed Keane, now this is 2 years before Hiroshi Koizumi says, oh man, everybody in the film community knew he was working as an espionage agent for the US military because he spoke fluent Russian. And so the Vietnam, he was in the Korean War translating Russian, and then he was in. They go, why is he still in Tokyo? How is he making money living in Tokyo? What is he doing with that skill he has translating Russian? So that was the big rumor. But again, 2 years before, Ed Keane comes into my bar and goes, I read this book. It's really interesting. It's about the famous Russian spy in Japan, Sorge. It was a whole novel. He goes, you should read this. And then when they told me that, I went, the pieces fall into place.
Wow, this is a movie.
And here's the weirdest thing about this story, or at least I think it's the weirdest thing. So
there's something weirder.
Yeah. So years before I met Ed Keane, I was running around the San Francisco underground music scene, and there was this guy that we were all friends with, and his name was Tim Keane, and I never made any connection. And that was Ed Keene's son, one of his two sons. And then when I met his dad, I went, hey, Tim, why don't you ever tell me about your dad being one of the guys in Mothra? And he goes, well, it's kind of embarrassing.
What?
Oh, no.
Well, because, they also had, like, he and his wife split up and, and all this stuff happened. So, he was like, oh, it's my dad. He was in some Japanese movies, whatever. I was like, I could have met your dad 15 years ago.
Wow.
15 years earlier,
Wow.
I could be in his will, but that was the strangest part of the story is that, that I knew Ed Keene's son before I knew he was connected to this guy who was also in the Starman movies. He was in the first one, but he got cut out of all that footage that got cut out of Atomic Rulers. But he's in the Japanese version. He's like a big bad in the Japanese, one of the big bads in the Japanese version with a lot of Japanese dialogue. He spoke fluent Japanese, fluent Russian, was a vaudeville kid, singing and dancing on stage as a child actor, and went in the military and like translated Russian for the American forces. Kind of crazy. He had a crazy life.
I'm telling you, this is like a mini series.
It totally is.
Really.
But when you brought these actors to this film festival, were they in awe by the love and just adoration for what they've done in these movies?
Yeah, especially with the actors like that, especially when they've been in because Akira Kubo had been in a number of Kurosawa pictures before.
Mm-hmm.
Japanese actors usually have private lives. People that want to interview them about the films that they used to do. Usually it's done very formally, where you go to their home or you go to a restaurant and you interview them. You get a private room in a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And you interview them, and it's very formal. There's no way to be casual or to get close, because especially with the fan revival that happened in Japan. So they treated these guys like they were fragile. Mm-hmm. And so they would tell you, oh, if you come to Japan, you can meet this person and that person. Then you'd go to Japan and go, I called you on your bluff. And they're like, oh.
Uh-oh.
And they're like, well, and then they think you're going to do some American thing and embarrass.
Right. Yeah.
Embarrass them.
What are the odds of that happening?
If I go, what? You don't trust me? I'm going to drop my pants in the middle of a dinner with Honda.
Yeah, right.
Feel comfortable. I think I should have my pants off. Nothing weird or sexual about it. It's just too damn hot in the restaurant. I'm taking
It's an American tradition.
We do it at barbecues from sea to shining sea. 4th of July weekend. I don't have cargo shorts, so it's just going to be my boxers.
Don't they get cops in this country?
Yeah, don't they shoot horses, don't they? Don't they shoot guys in boxers, don't they? So when they came here, and everybody, Takarada, everybody really would bring this up, is that in Japan, even if there's a public appearance, then they've only really recently they only started doing public appearances after a couple of these guys came to some of the events that happened here in the 90s, like Chiller.
Yeah.
Right.
Or G-Fest in Chicago. And they would go back to Japan and go, wow, the fans want to hang out. They invited me to it. They had a late night dance. They got us drunk. I danced with some of the organizers' wives. I comped a feel, whatever, they gave us all this crazy food. They took us to restaurants and they treated us like wow, and because the Japanese meetings would be very, very formal.
Formal, right? Yeah, no fun.
Very, very, the interview's over. Goodbye. I'll never see you again.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Right.
And then they started doing at one-day events in Japan, because they don't do conventions like we do conventions, really.
Right.
They only really have the Japanese science fiction conventions, which happens every year. It's like their version of Worldcon. But but that is just for literary, mostly literary sci-fi. And they don't have pop culture cons like we have, or even the cons we grew up with, like, the 2-day comic convention, your local, gymnasium, or a creation
Star
con
Trek convention.
Yeah, creation con or things like that, right?
Right.
So they didn't really have anything like that, or they had events that sold toys, or they had a couple events in the early 80s that celebrated these films, and they actually did invite Honda to come and speak formally and do lecture, but he wasn't there like hanging out, like sitting at a table, like I went to a Star Trek event in 97. It might have been one of the early celebrations that happened in San Francisco. 97,
I was
not bigger
there.
than a regular con. Okay. So I was working with this guy named John Wells. He has a little company called Cool Stuff Video. And we're at this booth, and next to us to our left, so next to us to our left was Uncle Owen signing autographs.
Oh, really?
Right?
Wow.
So Uncle Owen signing autographs, and
The actor from Star Wars who played Uncle Owen. Yeah.
Right. So Uncle Owen's sitting there. And at one point, since we were at our table most of that weekend, I was just helping out John, and just like, I'm going to hang out by your, I'll help you out. You need to go run and get something. I'll just hang out, And so at one point, late in the day, on the second day, we look over and Uncle Owen is asleep. he's kind of resting his head on the table, right? And somebody had gone by and wrote a sign and put it next to him that said, "Uncle Owen isn't dead; he's just napping." So the Japanese,
too much blue milk,
right? So way too much blue milk. And so there was the Japanese don't do events like that. The Japanese will do, if they bring a guy out, he does a talk show. They do a package deal where he comes out and talks for like an hour. Maybe they do a presentation and a talk, which is about an hour. And then you shake all your hands, all the people. You have to buy a separate ticket at the event to do the meet and greet, and you get gifts. You get an autograph picture and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And so they just give you this whole thing. And that's kind of how they started doing it after these guys came over here and were just raved. But it's still free range guesting in America for these guys. We took Nakajima out to go have a cigarette break. We had the Japanese want to have a regimented schedule of what to do. So it shows that you're organized and you're professional and you know what you're doing. So we wouldn't do, because of his age, he was in his early 80s. We didn't want to do any signing. And some of these cons, Nakajima went out to some con I'm not going to mention, which was kind of a prominent convention for a while back east. And they had him at the table for 8 to 10 hours a day with no breaks. Nobody was coming by and going, time for a break. They just said, "Oh, we'll bring you a sandwich or something."
Wow.
This is what was told to me. I wasn't there. Sure. I don't know what happened. It might be an exaggerated story, but I was told it wasn't good. But
that's no good.
So we scheduled this thing where we'd have them sign no more than an hour.
Great.
And then at the peak part of the day where we'd have the most energy, we do like maybe an hour, 90-minute session, but most of them were 1-hour sessions. And then you get 1 hour break. After a session, there would be a 1 hour or a 90-minute break, which would include like going to a restaurant and getting him food, taking him off site, and taking him to a real restaurant, not going like, "Here's what they had in the commissary. Here's your reheated pepperoni pizza."
Here's a vintage hot dog.
Yeah, and he had dietary restrictions, so we asked his daughter ahead of time. She goes, low sodium. Okay, cool. But, he can have ramen once or twice. So a couple times, and what you do customarily is like, you don't take these guys to an American restaurant. You would take them to a Japanese restaurant, and that Japanese restaurant has to be good. It has to taste like food in Japan, because they won't say anything to you. But afterwards, they'll tell everyone they know that you took them to the worst. You took them for the worst ramen they ever had. So but bringing them out, letting people come and greet them. Nakajima would take a cigarette. He'd do like, as soon as he was finished signing, he'd go outside, have a cigarette break. Thankfully, he quit smoking like a couple years after Monsterpalooza. He completely quit smoking because he was what they call in Japan, we call chain smokers, they call heavy smokers, heavy smoker in Japan. And, his daughter worked for a medical care facility that took care of the elderly and the infirmed.
Okay.
And so she took care of her parents too. But yeah, people just shed so much love, and because Americans are not shy to express admiration and love, verbally or physically or emotionally. And the Japanese, even though a Japanese person might meet them and they're going to do a deep bow and they might cry in a dark corner afterwards, they're not going to express that in front of the person, the celebrity they're meeting. In fact, Nakajima's daughter told us that, like, usually when these after parties, after she put dad to bed, no one would go like, hey, do you want to hang out? Do you want to hang out? Mm-hmm. She said nobody ever asked her to hang out. So she suffers from insomnia and she would be jet lagged. Mm-hmm. So she would just stay in the room with her dad and read a book all night. Like putting dad to bed at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night because the time lapse too, and the time difference. And then so we were the first ones to go like, I am tooting my horn on this one. We're the first ones to treat her like an actual person and not somebody who was attached and not. That's what she told us, which is really neat. We said, when you put Pops to bed, come down to the bar here at the hotel here in Burbank, and we're going to get you loaded. That's what we did, man.
Oh, that's wonderful.
When last time we were at G-Fest, James and I are sitting at the bar, and here comes Akira Takarada.
Yeah.
And we wave at him and we're like, hey, Takarada-san! and he was so happy.
Yeah.
And he came over to us and he toasted us. I mean, it must be like another world, to get into this
kind of
effusive affection.
Right. They're getting this adulation they've never had before. It's a little addictive, It's like there was a couple times where Takarada goes, I want to come back to G-Fest next year after his first appearance, right? And then the guy who organizes the show was like, well, I don't think we can afford it. We're gonna get different guests. We like to have different guests every year. Maybe the year after that, you want to come back? He goes, no, I'll just pay my own way. Just put me on the bill, and I'll just show up because he had such a good time.
Yeah. He gave me his card.
Yeah.
I have his card. I'm so it's like one of my most prized possessions.
Right.
You get
that means a lot in Japan.
Yeah.
Because these guys do not hand out their business cards to anybody. Giving you their business card is an invitation to contact them personally.
We gotta go.
We gotta do it. And we had him. So we always do these intros, these shout outs. Right. And we'll get somebody, whoever, celebrity or whatever, will say, please say something nice about Monster Party.
Listen to Monster Party.
Listen to Monster Party. Something that simple. And so we got his assistant. We ran the whole idea by her first.
Right.
And then she talked to him. He's like, yeah, he wants to do it. So we tell her this is what we want him to say. And he goes, I love Monster Party. And he did this whole thing like he did a dramatic turn.
He did like 3 takes.
He did 3 takes. And he was, he's checking in with us. Like, is that good? Is that right? Perfect. And, I mean, that's just so beautiful. And it's surreal to us too, because you're Akira Takarada. You're like a friend of mine that I grew up with.
I watched you on TV in the 60s.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing like when I'm assuming, were you behind bringing the Ultraman cast?
No, that was another guy.
Okay.
Because the Nakajima thing I did was supposed to be just a one and done.
Okay.
Because I was planning an event for San Francisco to celebrate Nakajima in 2008 or 9. We were going to do an event there that would also be a tie-in for my book had just come out. So we were going to do that as a tie-in and just do a whole weekend of Nakajima movies. And it was called, what we're going to call it? Godzilla and the Monsters of Mass Destruction was going to be the name of the event. And it was going to be something like we were going to run 11 movies over the weekend or something like that, 11 or 12 movies over the weekend, all with Nakajima in them. And there was some new management that came into the Castro Theater. We were planning the event. I already asked the Nakajimas to show up. And then there was basically the rug was pulled out from under my feet.
Right.
So then talking to a friend of mine, David Chappell in Southern California, I was like, we should bring Mr. Nakajima out somehow and do some kind of event. And then the guy who runs Monster Palooza reached out to me because he wanted to start doing sort of a corner of Monster Palooza. He wanted to incorporating a Japanese kaiju themed part. He wanted to install something permanently.
Okay.
That would feature kaiju programming, and said, I want you to bring a guest over from Japan. And I was like, well, there's the perfect opportunity to bring Nakajima over and, sort of make good on my promise to bring him over. It's not going to be San Francisco. It's going to be beautiful downtown Burbank. But, I mean, they loved it just the same. We took him to the Hollywood. We took him to where you can look at the Hollywood sign. We took him to his star on the Walk of Fame, which he had never seen before.
Yeah.
Nice.
Oh.
And he was standing there, and they were actually repairing part of the sidewalk in front of Grauman's, but they stopped right before his star.
Oh, yeah. For people who don't know, the Godzilla star is kind of right by the box office. It's just a little bit past the box office on the sidewalk there.
Right.
That's
so
where you
anyway,
find the
we just took him to see his star, and then he started doing Godzilla poses. We're taking photos. His daughter's taking photos. We're all taking photos. I think there were 4 or 5 of us there. We had hired a photographer. Basically, you can hang out the entire weekend with Mr. Nakajima and do everything with him that we were doing. You're going to get to go to all the dinners, lunches, and breakfast if you want. Just take the photos. It's only going to cost you being the photographer for the whole weekend, Wow. And he was a Godzilla fan. He runs he's one of the main guys that actually maintains the website Toho Kingdom.
Okay.
Chris. And he's a great photographer, and he just covered that whole weekend. I have photos. I this is what I did. This is my thinking. Like, Nakajima had a couple of breaks. I go, Chris. He goes, take him over to Bird-Eye Gordon's booth now. I want photos with Bird-Eye Gordon. So it's like I got photos with Nakajima, Godzilla with Mr. Big.
That's right.
Oh my God.
2 icons of 50s giant monster movies.
Sure.
And then I went, and then Rico Browning. Two men in suits from 1954.
Oh
Right.
my
Now,
God.
Hey, come on, a Godzilla Village of the Giants mashup.
Yeah.
So you got Godzilla and Bo Bridges.
Just as long as we can get Ronnie Howard into the game.
Exactly.
Little
and
Ronnie Howard.
Little Ronnie Howard. Hey, genius.
Genius.
The last Food Fest a couple of years ago that Matt and I went to, in the big night they do the costume contest and Jeopardy and the Mangled Skyscraper Award, and they gave the award to Nakajima's daughter. Nakajima had already passed,
right?
And when she was presented with it, she started crying.
Yeah.
And you had a room there with hundreds of people, but you could have heard a pin drop. To anybody who cares about this stuff and who loves this stuff, I strongly recommend you attend this convention, because that's the one thing. It's a community of people who are all passionate about this stuff.
Right.
And it's a lot of families, and it's a lot of kids. And you see little kids sitting on the floor playing with Godzilla vinyls. And it's a beautiful sight. It's just wonderful.
And great after parties.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the Godzilla blood party.
Yeah.
Kyle Jones.
So August, the Tokusatsu films and the shows, Ultraman and Kamen Rider and all these shows, they're still going strong, it seems like. I mean, throughout the 70s, maybe the peak, but I mean, the 80s and 90s into the 2000s, they're still pretty damn popular, and there's still a lot of them.
Right.
I just wanted to know, like, from your point of view, where do you see Tokusatsu going? Like, what is it, how is it going to evolve, especially now with, now nerds and guys like us kind of rule the media, and it's cool to be a nerd, and it's cool to love all this stuff.
And there's a whole new younger generation of kids. Basically, I'm talking about real teenagers and like young adults that are into this stuff deep. But they're, but it's interesting because you have the guys that are the fans of Kamen Rider and Super Sentai, but they're not much Godzilla fans, or they're not much Ultraman fans,
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they weren't exposed to it like we were, where it was on television a lot, and you could go to a theater and see them being played. and pick up on whatever you might go to Little Tokyo or Japantown in San Francisco and find some book or magazine that has pictures of all this other stuff that you didn't know existed, and go, I want to know more about this. And plus, they have the benefit of the internet. They have the benefit
social
of
media,
and fan subs. That is the prime mover of all of this. There are two prime movers for the new generation, the post 70s, 80s generation.
Right.
And one is Power Rangers, which led a lot of people to, and the internet, of course.
Yeah, right.
And so the internet allowed people to go like, well, this Power Rangers stuff, now I'm old enough. And it says that it was originally produced in Japan, as such and such by Toei Company, and they started Google searching,
right?
or they started Google searching stuff. It was in the credits, produced in Japan by Toei Company.
Right.
So people were, whoop. So they were adapted from Japanese shows, and they started exploring, but there was still no way to watch them. Then these groups started having pen pals in Japan because of the internet, and then getting Japanese fans because you had the emergence of DVR technology in Japan.
Right.
And so people were able to record a show, and then I don't know if they were using bandwidth at that point. I'm not really up on the fan sub, like intimate history of fan subbing. But anyway, they were able to get copies of these shows that were just broadcast to American fans who would then subtitle and time them and then, render them and then upload them and allow other people to download and watch these shows, not long after they were broadcast, which had everybody watching the latest shows, and they were jazzed on that because they were watching them 2 years before Saban might adapt it. They were 2 years ahead.
Right.
And they didn't want to really get out of that comfort zone. There were other shows, and I was writing about back in the 90s, I was going like, there's all these other great shows that Toei made in the 70s and 80s. And you would find fans maybe from Brazil who saw those shows, or other fans in Japan. And random Americans who lived in Japan in the 80s or had grandparents that sent them videotapes to the United States, or here's the latest kid shows in Japan. Why don't you watch this stuff?
Right. Because I think I don't think we can underestimate the effect that Power Rangers had, because it really did. Right. It was so huge, and it just, and it really did open the eyes to a lot of people to realize, there's this stuff in Japan. Like, we just took this from Japan. Yeah.
And I was always kind of disheartened in a way because, they were looking currently and forward, a lot of the fan subbers. And that was fan subbing was something that I wanted to do back in the 80s, man. I wrote a couple of scripts, worked with a group of people, but, it's like the equipment at the time was just too expensive for us. Now you can do all that on your desktop, or a laptop. But at the time we were trying to do stuff, we never ended up doing it. We did a lot of talk. Nothing ever got done, which was kind of sad. But then these guys started doing it, and I was going, well, the only thing that I appreciate that they're looking forward, they're giving us the new shows and stuff, but what about the old shows? Right. And all of a sudden there was this next wave of fans that were going like, I kind of want to look, these guys are all these different groups. Some of them would fight. They would subtitle the same show and argue over whose translation was better. It's Fandom. Yay, Fandom. So other guys were like, I'm going to look at the back catalog now. And they started going into the back catalog. Now you have these guys doing older shows, which is great. And some people are going like, man, those shows that they made in the 70s were insane. I go, yeah, the shows that the Japanese PTA kept complaining about and wanted to shut down. It's like they're melting human beings into skeletons in this episode.
Or was that like Barome 1?
Yeah, Barome 1, yeah.
Barome 1.
Okay. Barome 1,
and that one,
that's
I
one of
love.
My favorites.
I mean, just the villains. Where I've got a vinyl figure of one of them that's like the heads on the end of a hand. Yeah. There's the one that's like an actual hand. Hand, right?
Right. Yeah, and he's got a cut in his palm. He's got an eyeball on his forefinger.
Yeah. I mean, that just fills me with joy.
Yeah, those are like nightmarish. They're amazing. I saw these pictures of those characters like in the early 70s, going to San Francisco's Japantown and opening up these books and seeing these why can't I see this?
Yes.
Why can't I see this? And I would dream about it. Then it was still like, it was like end of the decade where, VCRs, were becoming cheaper.
Right.
They were still like $1,000, but they were becoming cheaper to get. And then they were like, I started having pen pals in Japan and going like, can you record all this crazy stuff? But
what was the show? I think it was on USA's Night Flight, Dynaman. What was the original show of that?
Dynaman. It was a Super Sentai. It's one of the Super Sentai series.
So they just redubbed it into a comical thing, right?
Yeah.
It was like, but that was okay.
Yeah, they said let's do What's Up Tiger. Basically, it was like let's do What's Up Tiger Lily, which had recently had a revival of popularity because of home video at the time.
Right.
So these guys were like, I rented, What's Up Tiger Lily. It was hilarious. They took a couple of Japanese spy pictures and dubbed it, and they go, we could do that with a TV show.
Yeah, speaking of which, can you get the original spy movies that became What's Up Tiger Lily? Key of Keys and
Key of Keys, Powder Keg. There's a couple others. I think there's 5 total in that exact series.
And they're Toho kind of productions, right?
Yeah, and there were kind of some other films peripherally that are similar, but they're not the same characters, but they were the same actors playing similar roles.
Playing Phil Moskowitz.
Yeah, Phil Moskowitz, lovable rogue.
Anglo-Saxon Hun.
I'm a Pan American jet.
My favorite ending of any movie.
I'd say he was a sadomasochistic necrophile, but that would be beating a dead horse.
When we were in Japan a few years ago, and just like anytime we'll go out to a convention or whatever, we'll find figures. Right. Usually it's figures. So we all collect shit. Do you collect any of this stuff?
Yeah, I do.
Oh well, you must be like, where do you begin?
Like a warehouse of stuff.
Where do I get it? Or
what do you collect? What do you focus on?
Everything.
There's too much. Every time I go to Japan, what I do is I decide what is the focus of this trip. Because otherwise, there's a cool thing. There's a cool thing. There's a cool thing from different things I like.
Yeah,
I like, and I'll turn things down. That's a really good price for that.
Yeah,
but I'm not buying Godzilla posters, movie posters this trip. I'm buying Sonny Chiba posters this trip. I'll buy, it's like I got like movie posters for about 40 different Sonny Chiba movies.
Wow.
That you could pick up back. This is like late 90s, early 2000s. You could pick those up for $10 to $20 a piece.
Wow.
Mint condition. And then I was turning down like an original Godzilla versus Megalon for $50, going like, oh, I can get that later. But some of these Sonny Chiba movies I might not be able to find.
Right.
So I would focus on one thing, or this time I'm only buying Ultraman stuff. This time I'm only buying Godzilla stuff. It would be that kind of, I had to make that mindset. Otherwise it'd go too crazy. So because my interest is vast in terms of like, it's like old school anime. And I'm talking about like, not so much like Astro Boy and Speed Racer and stuff like that, but, things like Mazinger Z, the super robots, the Gonagai robots, Devilman,
For me, it's Kitaro.
Kitaro, yeah. Did you hear about this year is the big anniversary year for Kitaro? And there's 3 film projects that are happening this year. And one of them is a movie that is it's a Into the Spider-Verse version of Kitaro.
Perfect.
Yeah, they're doing an animated film where every single individual animated iteration of Kitaro come together to fight one epic battle.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
So it's the Kitaro from 68, the 68 version, the 72 version. Because basically what started happening is Kitaro goes into a revival of popularity about every decade. Right. And so Toei brings back an animated series, of Kitaro. And the recent one they did was like over 100 episodes, which you could stream on Crunchyroll, they were simulcasting every week. It would be on like an hour and a half after broadcast in Japan. But they're doing 2 other projects, I think one's a feature film, and then there's another series or something, even though they just finished the other series. But Kitaro is great.
I always hope that they'll go back to the original creepiness of that very first series.
They did an animated series, a short animated series based on Hakaba no Kitaro.
Yes. Yeah, that's good. That one is good. That one's like, really weird. Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So, I think there's going to be something about him coming back. They're going to do something with that iteration. And a funny thing about the character created by a prolific manga artist who fought in the Pacific War and lost his right arm in the war.
Yep.
And he learned to retrain himself to draw and write with his left hand.
Unbelievable.
All that manga output he did was left-handed, and he wasn't a lefty, he was a righty. And anyway, so he passed away just a couple of years ago too. He had a Facebook page, and he was posting every day on Facebook. He'd go to the office. He would show like his favorite snack food.
Yeah, eat McDonald's. Yeah.
Wow. So it was pretty great. So
yeah, we went to my wife and I went to Sake Minato.
Oh, nice. Excellent,
yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I wish I could have met him. As one of the guys on the bucket list of people you want to meet, but it's my list is way too long.
Yeah.
And you don't want to go like, I want to meet these 400 people, and then you have no more friends. But the author Mizuki, Shigeru Mizuki, he did a couple live action series based on his yokai manga over the years, and he did a show called Akuma-kun, which is based on one of his manga, which kun is a diminutive for usually a boy.
Okay.
Akuma means devil. So it would be sort of like calling somebody little devil.
Okay.
That's my English transliteration but I do it LIL apostrophe devil. Little devil.
Japanese hot stuff.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. But they, instead of doing an animated series, the guy who did Red Shadow, the Masked Ninja, Johnny Sacco, he was like, let's do a live action series, because this was the same year as Ultra Q. They did a black and white 26 episode adaptation of Little Devil with giant monsters, with creatures and creeps and ghouls of Dracula, a living mannequin, cyclopean mannequin. They did a couple giant monsters in there. And it's about a boy who's inherited this power. He's in a long line of people. He's got this special, he's got a mole on his forehead, but since he has long hair over his face, you can't see it. But he is sought out by Faust. Faust goes, you have to carry on my work of returning demons to hell.
Wow.
Nice. Ridding the earth of these demons that are running amok. I'm too old, and then they're raging. I'm too old, I can't defeat them all. And he goes, I'm going to give you the power to control Mephisto, and gives him the spell. And they do this Elohim Esaimu does this whole thing. And through this, the magic circle, they actually use a magic circle. Up pops the devil, who's in a top hat and tails.
I think I've seen the opening to this show.
Yeah, you probably have seen the opening to that show. Right. And so the devil at first says no. And he goes, well, I'm going to get you to sign this contract. Like Akuma-kun's, you're going to sign this contract. But he has two weaknesses: chocolate. Mephisto has the weakness for chocolate, and his other weakness is he can't stand the sound of ocarina.
And what's that?
An ocarina, it's that like a carved wind instrument.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
So if he blows into an ocarina, Akuma-kun, it causes great pain to Mephisto. And the horn on his head, he has a little horn on his head. That's where he wears the top at, because he's got this horn, but it looks more like a big bump that sticks up out of the top of his head. But literally like Bewitched, steam will shoot out of his head, and he's like,
I have to see this show.
So I've got it all on Laserdisc.
All right, I'll be over in 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's great. It's just really great. But that was another show that the guy who did Gegege Kitaro did, and they're also going to be doing a new Akuma-kun animated series this year.
Fantastic!
Wow,
because it's the 100th. I think it's the 100th anniversary of the author's birth.
Wow,
would have been this year. So they're doing a few projects, and they're doing an animated Akuma-kun that's probably going to follow the manga more. The live action series from '66 was they were going for more of an Ultra Q vibe, a little bit. But it's got it's shot in black and white. It's really neat. It's kind of got some Bewitched elements, but there's a mummy in it. There's a mummy that turns giant. There's a giant bird.
Yes.
There's
please.
Other demons and devils that dress like in outfits from the 16th century, and they go to hell in one episode.
Oh my God, I'm about to explode.
Yeah,
it's good stuff.
Yeah,
it's good stuff.
Well,
that's another show to look out for.
Well, the one thing I've learned from this is the whole world of tokusatsu. It's enormous. And we could go on and on for another 3 hours or so.
Do a part two.
We'll absolutely do a part two.
We are definitely going to have you come back, August.
You're like a fountain of fascinating information.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so good to hang with you.
you've got this encyclopedic knowledge. You did this incredible book on Tsuburaya. Is there any chance that you might work on a book? I'd love a coffee table book of all this stuff, because in English, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It would be so useful.
Like the ultimate American tokusatsu kind of coffee table book. Yeah.
Yeah, there's an idea that I had, but it's one of the hard parts, is getting all the copyright clearances.
Yeah.
From these Japanese companies. It's like, even America has different idea of fair use than Japan has really no fair use.
Yeah,
sure.
Right.
There's really, and they just clamp down on copyrights more there because of the pirating,
Sure.
And people were doing things like, it's insane. Not only were, people scanning manga and uploading them to the internet for people to download or peruse, they were also scanning books at high res, like books on Godzilla and stuff like that. Like, it's got a lot of great photos in it. They would just buy a copy and pull all the pages apart and scan all the pages at high res.
Wow.
And just upload them. So these are some of the copyright things that the Japanese have been fighting.
Right.
Like here's a thing about doing my book is like, Toho is not really into helping a lot of the American authors who put out books on Godzilla films.
Sure.
So you'll see like a book come out and there's like virtually no photographs. There may be some associated press photos and really maybe not even the ad mats from the press books for the American versions or the American posters or whatever. Toho sort of says, well, we own all that, and they go, well, this was released for fair use by these companies like American International Pictures 30 or 40, 50 years ago. Right. And Toho's like, well, that doesn't hold anymore. Tough. Even though they haven't legally gone through the work to trademark all those individual things, because they would be spending years having one group of attorneys doing that,
right.
And cost them through the nose just for Godzilla properties. When we did my book, there had just been an announcement made for Eiji Tsuburaya's 100th anniversary celebration, where all these various corporations, film companies, and publishers all agreed to work together to help each other out with no obstacles to promote the works of Eiji Tsuburaya. So we published my book under that project, which was called the Eiji Project.
Okay.
And so Toho could not say no to us, but Toho said, well, don't expect us to help you at all, but you can do whatever you want. But we're not gonna go like, well, we're gonna open our archives to you. Get your photos, publish the photos, but you have to like say property of Toho or whatever, but we're not going to give you any help. But that was our way around it. Plus the book was primarily a project of Eiji Tsuburaya's company, Tsuburaya Productions. So I was working for Tsuburaya Productions to produce this book. So I had Japanese juice behind me and Toho couldn't say no to us. So
I just need to ask you one question.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about all this copyright stuff.
Yeah.
And there was that big lawsuit between Tsuburaya and the Thai company. Yeah, and it's interesting to me because you're talking about all these rights issues.
Yeah,
and it seemed like it's almost impossible that there would have existed a system that they had for as long as it was happening that they would share rights to Ultraman with this Thai company who were clearly given every opportunity doing something nefarious.
Right. Yeah, the unfortunate thing with that whole story, and it's a pretty long story, but the short Reader's Digest version is that, the Thai company was just another licensee. So they were like, we want Ultraman to show in our country, and it was popular, and, and it was like, okay, we want more, and hey, we want to do this movie. Do you want to go in with us in halves? You could release it in Japan and we'll release it in Thailand. And there were this kind of relationship that they had, but it was kind of a very fast, loose, kind of like gentleman's agreement, handshake kind of business that was happening. And then after the guy who was the CEO was the second son of Eiji Tsuburaya, was the guy that dealt with the guy in Thailand, Mr. Sampote Sands, the director of Alligator. And other bad movies, but this guy did not push this issue and create this problem until just after he died. So after Noboru Tsuburaya died, all of a sudden it was, hey, I've got this contract he signed back in 1974 that says he's turning over all the ownership of Ultraman to me. and intellectual property itself, and that credits me as the designer of Ultraman.
Yeah. And apparently this document has a lot of misspellings and very suspect.
Yeah, very, very suspect. And it was in an American court of law, it was thrown out.
Wow.
Yeah. And then finally, I mean, it went through all through China, Thailand, Japanese courts, and that all went back and forth. And it wasn't until they went into a Los Angeles federal court that it got over, that they finally won.
Wow.
Wow.
One for us.
Yeah. The Americans did something good for Japan for once.
Well, perhaps the timing worked out for listeners. This book, E.G. Tsuburaya, Master of Monsters, that August did, is just amazing. The work that you did, August, is just fantastic. All the detail.
Great.
And then the photos. You've got photos that I've never seen before.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes photos. I love this book. And for listeners,
Me too.
this is a great book to have.
Thanks. And it's both editions are sold out, and the prices are kind of crazy right now for a secondary market. But it's we did a second edition in 2014 to capitalize on the release of the Gareth Edwards Godzilla from Legendary. And we were able to update and revise that second issue a little bit. But I think between the two of them, there was something like 25,000 copies between the two editions. So those are all gone now, man.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't have any copies of I have one copy of the second edition.
Wow.
And I have 3 copies of the first edition, but 2 of them are mine. One is the advanced copy I got. So it's that sentimental value being the advanced copy. And then I got another one that I took around to, get signed by guys like Nakajima and Takarada, like, sign my book.
Sure. Yeah.
And this is my book. I made this. And the third copy is I signed it for somebody at my table at G-Fest, and they left it at my table.
No.
And I've been guarding it ever since. So if there's somebody out there, tell me your first name. It's got your first name. I wrote your first name. I signed. I got a copy I got to send you because I took it home. I could have left it with the convention and said, if someone, says I lost my book, and I don't know if they thought they left it somewhere else.
Sure.
They never came back to my table to ask if they had left it there. And it's been plaguing me, man. I want to get this book, this copy back to the person who actually bought it. And, he brought his own copy, which means he bought it previously.
Yeah.
So it's not like, it was money I sold him at the event or anything. It was just sort of like, this was something he brought all the way to the convention. That's what bothers me. He brought it all the way there. And it's not, it was the hardcover edition. So the first one, so it's not light, exactly light. It's kind of heavy. So, I just want to get it back to that guy, man. And this is like,
well, it'll be our mission. We'll try to track this guy down.
Yeah.
But now, in addition to this book, I know you've done stuff for Shout Factory. Is there anything that you're working
what do you have
on?
coming up?
Anything coming out from you?
Well, right. There's nothing currently with Shout Factory. I think the last thing I did with them was the Ultraman 50th anniversary special that we did on Shout Factory TV, where I picked, 10 of my favorite episodes.
Yeah.
Of Ultraman. And then I bookended it. I got them to do it. I go, well, it's like, you could pick 10 episodes. And I go, well, we should put the first and the last episode on there too. So I got to push them to do 12. Of 12 episodes. And we shot like segments of me introducing each of the episodes, doing an intro and an outro. That was like really the last big involved project that I did with Shout. And there's been a couple of they've contacted me to consult with, to ask me advice on a couple things when they were going to be doing more Ultraman stuff a couple years ago. They were going to license some more titles from Tsuburaya. And then that ended up going, to Mill Creek. And then they ended up doing a deal with Mill Creek about streaming. Right. And then there was then they asked me, if we get Kamen Rider, which Kamen Rider shows should we get? Because we want to maybe try a couple, but we can't invest in the whole thing because we don't know how well it's going to do. So I gave them a list. They said, could pick 5 shows. That would be the best ones to get,
Which ones?
Oh, I picked Amazon, the original series, of course. I couldn't pick V3 because that's currently under license in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think it was Amazon and Stronger, Kamen Rider Stronger from 1975.
Black?
Which is Black is. I recommended them to get Black, but I said you could pass on RX for now.
Yes, thank you.
Our RX isn't that important.
That's right.
You know that there was supposed to be a third Black series.
Is that right?
Yeah, with the same actor playing. He was going to mutate again and have another Kamen Rider Black formed. And then the sponsors and the network were like, let's do something different. We want you to do something different. But that was the plan at Toei. They wanted to do a third because the response to RX was still good ratings. But Black is like the best of the two shows.
Black is fantastic.
Yeah, it's great.
And RX that's what's so weird about RX is because it feels like all of a sudden it got the kiddie treatment.
Yeah, it got a little bit more of that. And then it was like, let's put as many toy products in it as possible.
Well, right. Yeah, right. Like, the 3 different forms and yeah.
There's RoboCop form. And then there's like,
no, right.
Why does this one turn into water? I have no idea. Turns into water or steam. Okay. But it wasn't, and the villains, most of the monsters and villains were designed by Kieda Amamiya, the guy who
I worship.
Yeah, Zayram,
Zayram, yeah.
Yeah.
Kamen Rider Zeo is probably, that was the first Kamen Rider I ever saw.
Right.
And I was just like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah, they did Zeo and Kamen Rider J.
J.
Those are now streaming legally on YouTube on the Toei Tokusatsu official world channel.
Fantastic.
Those just got uploaded this past weekend.
Oh, great.
Wow. This is timely.
Yeah, they're doing this big build. They're doing this big build up. Toei is for the 50th anniversary of Kamen Rider this year, and they're going to announce all this stuff in April, which is the anniversary month next month. And they're uploading to the first 2 episodes of every Kamen Rider show with English subtitles right now.
Nice.
Wow.
Nice.
Anyway, the big Kamen Rider stuff happening
Yay.
In April.
Fantastic.
For the world, not just Japan. For the world.
Yeah.
Cool.
Nice.
Well, August,
for the world.
We should do it.
August, thank you so much for being with us. I mean, this has just been such a joy.
Yeah. Oh, and also, and one thing, do you have a website or something like that people should go to, or?
Well, it's like, yeah, I do. I have I have a blog, but the blog I kind of put into semi-retirement. It's still up, and you can go through everything. It's called The Good, the Bad, and Godzilla. That's like august.ragone.blogspot.com or something like that. But The Good, the Bad, and Godzilla. And that's still up. A lot of content I did over about 10 years of content I put on that blog. And right now I'm just trying to figure out what is the next step that I want to do. And obviously I want to write a book and a long, I guess, desired project to do. I want to do a book that focuses on the golden age of Japanese superhero television shows, which would be the decade of the 70s, primarily with the intro chapter to like the 50s and the 60s, just to cover that, so it's not isolated, so you're not just looking at this is all that was produced from 71 to 79, without context, so I want to do, I want to do, that's been something I wanted to do before the Eiji Tsuburaya book. And the Eiji Tsuburaya book started out originally as a pitch to Tsuburaya for a book on the original Ultraman series. And because of all the difficulty with the Thai company, they said, well, we shouldn't be doing anything that's a Ultraman product tie-in. This is Tsuburaya and Chronicle Books. And they said, oh, we're going to rethink it, blah, 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 blah. And they came back and they said, oh, we kind of figured out what we're going to do. We can incorporate all the Ultraman stuff by doing a book about Eiji Tsuburaya. So are you ready to do that? I said, sure. And they go, okay, you got 10 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I basically had 10 months to write that entire book.
That's amazing.
Wow. Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, it's indispensable. We love it. And we love you.
And when you get started your next one, keep us informed. Let us know.
Yeah.
Want to let the world know
plug the shit out of it.
Yeah, hopefully we can go to a convention together sometime too.
Oh, yeah, exactly, man. Exactly. And I'm trying to figure out what to do exactly. I've been toying around with an idea of doing a YouTube show, just me rambling for a half hour, just contain it to a half hour and just talk about something that's really cool, just to inspire people to check something out. Instead of like, rambling about, well, here's everything that went into, here's the 2-hour pre-story of how they came up with the idea for Kamen Rider, just to go something like, Kamen Rider's really cool. This is why it's cool. This is why you should like it. Check it out. That's basically kind of an idea that's been rolling around in my head for a number of years. I got an opportunity to work with a producer at Funimation who approached me. It was somebody I had known from the music scene. She was in a band, a bass player in a band back in the 90s, and she was working for Funimation producing original content. And she said, hey, I want to have you come on and talk about for 5 minutes and talk about like something that's cool that people should check out. And it could be anything that you're interested in, a manga, an animated series, an Ultraman kind of thing, whatever. And we worked on this for a while. And then they got a new manager of that division came in who was a hire from Disney, who everybody said she was fired from Disney. And she came to work for Funimation and she pulled the plug on all the original content programming. Was the first thing she did. So that spark of an idea is still rolling around in my head. And then I see all these people, going like, just talking loosely for 2 hours about whatever.
Right. I hate those people.
And they're making they're having fun and they're doing a cool thing. And some of them are making some cheddar. And so I'm going like, what am I sitting around the house talking to myself all day for? When
do it. You got to do it.
We'll see. So it's like a crossroads. I'm not sure what I want to do. I definitely need to do a book. The problem is like finding the time and getting the resources to do it, because that's going to include also going back to Japan and interviewing some people. And we're getting further along in time.
They're getting old. Folks are getting older.
Yeah, a lot of the principal people I wanted to speak to have passed away. So it's people that I met and knew, but never were able had an opportunity to interview them for something formal. So there's have me on the show again. I'll talk about more crap.
Okay,
absolutely.
Well, anything that we can ever help with, you just let us know.
Yeah, because we didn't even touch on creature features or.
That's gonna be part 2, dude.
Part 2.
It's okay. It's okay.
August, like us, like all of us, you were inspired as a kid, as a monster kid. You took your inspiration and you lived the dream. You went to Japan, you learned, you soaked up all of this information, and you've become a resource, an authority on it. And for one, am really grateful for you for doing all this, because we need an authority on this. It's so inscrutable and so hard to find and understand. So
thank you. There's a lot of new kids coming up that are interested in the overall history, and they're digging into the past. They're going to be the next generation of people coming up. But I got to still keep putting stuff out. I should have started charging for this a long time ago. Because it's like, wind me up. I'll give you all the information for free.
Well, I think this would be a wonderful time to give a toast to the international treasure that is August Ragone.
Kampai.
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 Time for a listener shout out.
Shout out. Toku shout out.
Henshin shout out.
This goes out to David Lopez from Rio Hondo, Texas.
Yay, all right, David.
David is now the proud owner of a Monster Party t-shirt.
Fantastic.
The Monster Party logo t-shirt that glows in the dark.
Glows in the dark.
You can now be seen in the dark.
Yes, from space. They have a really, really powerful telescope.
You can go out and say, glow action.
And it will ignore you because it's always glowing.
Thank you so much for your support, David, and for representing Monster Party in Rio Hondo, Texas.
Yes, nice. Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Yes. And Monster Party merch is still available on our eBay store, which is Monster Party Store. Shipping is still free.
Wait, what?
I know.
That's crazy.
Insane.
Whoa.
Yeah. And if you
stupid.
And if you happen to be a Patreon member, when you order Monster Party merch, we will throw in some free surprises.
Oh, yes, we will. Like items donated to us by Jason Lindsay and Biff Bang Pow Toys. But not only that, Larry.
And they'll get some goodies from Ted Haynes, monster creator, foam fabricator.
Yes.
His Instagram is Foam Fabber. He's given us some great stuff to give to Patreon folks.
Yeah, really fun stuff. And he's a very talented and lovely man. And so thank you, Ted.
What is this Patreon of which you speak? How does one become a member?
What is it?
I didn't expect this question. Patreon is this thing where if you join it, you will get more things than we normally give you on our regular show. So you will get exclusive content. You will get bonus video, bonus audio, maybe some download to a book, anything fun and exciting that we can come up with to pass on to you. And I think you're going to enjoy it. If you join Patreon, after you join it, you will then have that moment in your day where you'll sit and you go, was that the right thing to do? And then you'll answer yourself, yeah, it was.
Is it expensive?
Oh, well, unless you think $5 a month is expensive, because I don't.
$5?
Yeah, $5,
That's
Larry.
Nothing. That's
it's
nothing.
It's nothing. What do you spend $5 on, Larry?
Well, I'll spend more on ramen. I'll tell you that.
Oh, the ramen joke again. Okay, good. Well,
you can
again. You didn't allow me to get my notes, so that's what you're gonna get.
You can't even
your
get
notes.
You're like the anti-improv guy.
Let me get my improv notes.
I'm sorry. Some people just can't be as creative and loose like you guys.
Well,
sorry.
$5 for ramen. Let's see. So that's what I think we discussed this before, but I think that comes out to about it would be 5 ramens, right?
No,
unless there's tax.
No, because
if you only have $5.
No, you can get 4 packets of ramen for $1.
Okay,
so that gives me
Where do you go to get your ramen? You can go to the 99-cent store and get ramen for 99 cents.
4 for $1.
No, 4 packs. I get 4 packs.
But that's $4.
No, saying 25 cents a piece.
For $1, he can get 4 separate
you can get 4 for $1.
Yeah. You can live like a king on $5.
Yeah, so I get 25 packs of ramen.
So you can eat for a week. I take it back. $5 is not enough.
And it's not just ramen, top ramen.
Top ramen. Well, that's when you're really spending the money. Yeah, that's when you
can eat for a week, or you can join Patreon. Come on, make up your mind.
So when you go to the supermarket, do you go like, I want, I don't want this other ramen, the 4 for $1. I want give me the top ramen, the top shelf. Yeah.
I think we've beat this ramen enough. Okay.
Yeah.
The point is, for $5, you can join.
Yes, it's
Patreon.
It's $5.
Yeah.
Okay. Done.
And hey, let's remind our listeners that you can find us on Facebook and on YouTube at Monster Party TV. Our Twitter handle at Monster Party HQ. Instagram is also Monster Party HQ. And hey, whatever platform you're listening to us, please take a moment and write us a review. We would love to hear your thoughts, and we will read it on the air.
If you say so. Are you ordering me to do that?
Yes.
But I think you'd want to read a review on the air.
I love reading reviews on the air.
Yeah.
You do.
I live for it.
Yeah. I like hearing you read them. You're like James Earl Jones.
But I want to point out, write a review. If you have something you want to say, if there's something we can improve on, let us know. I mean,
as long as it's very inconsequential. Big serious changes, Nah.
As long as it's in a
nah.
loving way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course,
I'm not here to get
you-
my ass kicked over a podcast.
Are you saying be gentle, Sean? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, maybe.
Yeah, no one's looking for a fight here. Okay, guys?
Yeah.
We're all just trying to get through this thing called life, as
Yes, true.
Prince once said.
It's true.
On that note, I am Matt Weinhold.
I'm Shawn Sheridan.
I'm Larry Strothe.
And I'm James Gonis.
Keep America strong.
And watch anything under the umbrella of Tokusatsu.
But don't watch it on TV Fly.
Oh no, TV Fly! And August Ragone is here. And I have a question to ask him initially about all of this.
Cool.
So, oh my God, is he in a spacesuit?
We just saw a flash of a spacesuit for a second there.
Hey, August.
Hey, what's happening?
Hey, how you
August,
doing?
it's so great to have you.
It's an honor, my friend.
What's going on?
Hey, man, we're just chilling here at the Monster Party Nerd Cave. And we saw, for a second, we saw you. It looked like you were in a spacesuit.
Oh, yeah. That's like an avatar photo. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, for a split second, I was just like, this dude commits. Like, if you're going to cosplay this, I'm going to need 5 minutes to get into my gargantua suit.
Yeah, exactly. Just looking for my Moonlight SY3 uniform. All I need. There should be a contingent of people who cosplay from Destroy
like Toho
All
Productions. Yeah.
Well, from Destroy All Monsters specifically.
Yeah.
Because there's a wealth of non off the rack costume design in that film that no one appreciates.
You got the Kelax, you got the SY3.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to be right there.
Yeah.
Because I got the height. I'm like 4 feet high. So, just scurry around the neighborhood in that costume would be fantastic.
Hey man, nobody ever, what was that? Nobody ever called Pablo Picasso an asshole.
oh my God. Who is that? Jonathan Richman. No? Yes?
He was only 5'3". Girls could not resist his stare. Pablo Picasso was never called
an asshole. Who does that song?
Well, that's Jonathan Richman. The Plugs did it for the Repo Man soundtrack.
Plugs, right? Okay. That's Plugs on Repo Man, right?
Right. Yeah. But I think it was Jonathan Richman was the original.
Is that right? Okay.
Nice.
I believe. Not entirely sure. Don't send any hate mail.
No. I think I said Jonathan Richman because I think somebody gave me like a compilation tape.
Right.
Many years ago, and I think it was the song before it or some was a Jonathan Richman thing or Modern Lovers, but I love that song. The Repo Man soundtrack is fantastic.
It's great. It's great, man. It's like, who remembers cassette tapes and lingerie?
I do.
Well, how long you guys been married?
Okay. Now,
Larry, that's the name of your autobiography, isn't it? Cassette tapes and lingerie.
Now, August, thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely.
So, just as I mentioned, this is kind of like, we'll do like an overview of Tokusatsu. We don't have to get so specific.
No, we're going to go into detail every Tokusatsu episode ever made now.
Because I know, August, there's so much.
We're going to go into every entry in your Ultra fan list.
Just think of this, August, as listeners to our show. They may be familiar with something. A lot of stuff they don't.
It's episode 1 of 1,375.
Oh.
Just on this topic alone.
Okay, now we consider that a commitment. Okay, so
all right, man, that's a verbal contract.
So, and August, I hope you don't mind. What Matt likes to do sometimes is at the end of our show, sometimes he puts on like little bloopers or little stuff either we talked about before the show or after the show.
Right.
And again, just to let you know, as this is not live, so as we're recording, if you say anything like, and Kurosawa was actually an asshole. Oh, I don't want to say that.
Right.
Kurosawa was never called an asshole.
Well, look, I'm just saying that. Just say, oh, guys, I shouldn't have. Just no problem. We'll stop. Matt makes a note. We'll go back and go. And Kurosawa was a great guy.
This will be edited into a smooth, lean machine when it's done.
And I think Toshiro Mifune did call him an asshole.
He may have at one point. He may have done that.
Yeah. We're just before we go on. I'm getting a little kind of a buzz. I think from you, August. Is there any slight?
I'll try to get you some good stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe the buzz will be louder next time.
So yeah, if there's any.
I don't know. I have a combo camera. It's antiquated camera microphone. There's also
around it if we have to. That's fine.
Everything electronic is off except for one amplifier, which is like pretty much volumed all the way down.
Okay, you sound okay. It's just when you kind of peak a couple times.
Yeah, every once in a while you peak and it makes a little click. I mean, look, we'll just kind of.
I peaked a long time ago.
I disagree, my friend.
Oh, the stories I could tell you.
Yeah.
I've tried.
Of course, that your book is like, it's like right on the table when you come into our homes. It's like, before you can come in, you must read this.
Oh, excellent. Thanks. I appreciate that.
And look, it's so fun because I think I mentioned this to you when I first met you at Comic-Con, actually. Ever since I saw you Creature Features, as a kid, I mean, I feel like I've known you. I know you don't know me. Who's this Larry guy?
This Larry guy stalking me for years.
I know, but I feel like I've known you for ages.
Right.
And
is it getting creepy yet?
Clowns, no. I'm saying, August, do you remember you had this? It was a Japanese animation convention at the Dunphy Hotel.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
And I was there with my younger brother. It was one room, and it was a little room with 3 little tables.
It wasn't that small of a room.
Oh, well,
wow.
It was about that hotel, the Dunphy Hotel, was a regular small science fiction convention hotel and also a gaming hotel. And there was a local con called Dragon Con, not to be confused with the monster of a show in Atlanta, right?
Right.
And anyway, so the reason why people booked events like that at the Dunphy, which was a San Francisco airport hotel, is because it looked like a castle.
It looked like a castle.
The facade was a castle.
Right.
I loved you. You would drive down the freeway and you could see it from the front. And I go, oh, that's such a cool hotel. I always wanted to go there. But August, I want to let you know that my brother and we went to your nice sized little convention.
Yeah, the one table and the bag of popcorn.
August, we had
stale popcorn.
August, we had a blast because you showed all the stuff we had never seen before.
Right. Yeah, we tried to dig out. I mean, I was already trading with pen pals in Japan. They were going like, I need episodes of Dark Shadows. And I'm like, I need everything.
Well,
send me everything.
Well, you're like ahead of the curve doing that. Before and before all that.
Right. At the time in Japan, like this is the con that we did at the Dunphy was 1983. And that was the third one. The first one we did was in 79, December 79 at the Union City Mall in Union City. The host of Creature Features, Bob Wilkins, who I was kind of working with a lot of that. I shouldn't say kind of.
Well, we'll talk about that.
Yeah. But anyway, this is my naivety being a teenager. He was like, hey, why don't you put on an event? There's a space in the Union City Mall in Union City that's available to use. And here are and then we worked out the dates and all that. Little did I know is that, he had a relationship doing public appearances at this mall because they had a shop called the Galactic Starport.
Sure. Remember it well.
Yes. So they, Bob had somehow bankrolled this. I don't know if he paid for the space or whatever, but he said, you got a barn kid, put on a show.
Nice.
I had Bob Wilkins' generosity as a human being is beyond the measure of almost any. I mean, people have gushing stories about their favorite horror hosts if they actually met them or developed some kind of a relationship with them in later years. But I mean, there was stuff that I didn't appreciate until a little later. But anyway, so that's how we launched the first one, and then we did a couple more. And there was a guy named Fred Patton who was considered an archivist and a historian of manga in America and anime. And he passed away a couple of years ago. But he wrote a book about 15, 20 years ago called Reading Manga, Watching Anime. I keep trying to say, I've got Robert Meyer Burnett stuck in my head because he pronounces anime. So I was about to say anime and I went, damn you, RMB. But anyway, the name of the book is Reading Manga, Watching Anime. And Fred listed our event in '79 as the first anime event held anywhere outside of Japan.
Wow.
Wow.
So that was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway, I digress.
Well,
we did a bunch of stuff, and Larry got hooked, and we polluted Larry's mind.
Exactly.
Look where he is today.
And now he's polluting mine.
Well, August, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get started.
Right.
What we're going to do is Matt will introduce the show with his little voice,
my little voice.
Cute little
and
voice.
then we introduce ourselves,
Right.
and then we say what the topic is. After we say
Right.
the topic, then we introduce who our guest is, and then we'll go to town. And
Cool.
as I said, what we'll probably start out is just how you got into it, your relationship with Bob Wilkins, Creature Feature, and then totally Tokusatsu. Okay.
Okay.
And then
okay?
I have one little question, and this is for August. So we're calling this Tokusatsu, and then we wanted to give it like a little Tokusatsu, the art of whatever.
Right.
And I don't think any of us really agreed on like how to describe in English Tokusatsu in a few words. Well, what would you suggest?
Well, I would just call it the art of Japanese special effects.
Perfect.
There you go.
Okay.
Great. Fantastic.
You see, that's why he's the expert.
That's why we go to the experts.
And that's why you're just the host or co-host of Monster.
I'm just with my little voice. Johnny Minimizer over here. Okay. All right. Hey, August, before we continue, it seems like we've lost Larry. And I thought he might jump back on, but he's not. And hey, James, I don't have my phone with me. Can you give him a quick ring?
Oh, yeah, I'll try texting him.
Or texting him, I'm sorry. Yeah, because you're using your phone. Sorry about this, August.
No, not at all.
But this is great. This is like
really.
a dream come true.
Thanks, man. It's good to be here. I mean, I've been thinking about doing this show for a long time. I'm like, God damn it, I got to get down to LA and do this thing.
And where are you normally from? Or like, where are you at right now?
San Francisco.
You are San Francisco. Okay, yeah. Because we're all, Larry and I are, Larry's San Mateo.
Right.
And I was San Francisco. I mean, I went to Lincoln High School.
Oh, right on. I went to Galileo.
Oh, there you go. APG in any high school. God help me.
Oh, shoot. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I went to Horace Mann Junior High. I went to Horace Mann Junior High School, which is in the Mission District, and it's right on the street Bartlett Street, right between 23rd and 24th Street, and on 23rd between Bartlett and Mission Street, which is the next intersection, was the world's first comic art store. Gary Arlington's San Francisco comic book company, which produced all the original Underground comics as well.
Wow.
That was in my neighborhood that I grew up in.
That's crazy.
Jeez.
And I would go every day. I was going there since two of my cousins would go there and drag me, the little cousin, along when they had to take care of me, because they lived in San Mateo, but they would come into the city and then have me run. They'd run around with me, but that was an excuse for them to go to Gary's comic book store because Gary would sell them like the Undergrounds.
Fantastic.
And these guys were in like, I think maybe they were like freshmen in high school at the time or something. And I was like 10 years old, so
you were like the Freak Brothers and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. In fact, what happened was we went in there. My eyeballs came out of my head because it was this tiny little shop, like my tiny little convention. Inside joke, but it was literally a tiny shop with high ceilings, like they were like 18-foot ceilings with comic books in bags and magazines and bags, plastering the walls all the way up to the ceiling.
Wow.
And it was a chaotic mess. It was like every rack was doubled up or tripled up with the different titles. But you would ask Gary where something was, and he would know where it was. Gary was the proprietor. You'd go like, so we got to the point where I would walk in, and Gary would go, "Hi, Augie. Famous Monsters didn't come in yet." It'd be one of those deals.
Oh, nice.
So I go in there with my cousins. They go and buy like whatever they're buying. I'm not interested in what they're buying at all. They buy like, I would read their comics. They would buy stuff like, the Fantastic Four and X-Men and stuff like that. And then I would read it. I would read it later. I was more of a Spider-Man kid. But the point is that we went back to their house afterwards because I guess my mom wanted to get me out of her hair for an afternoon or whatever. So I went with them to their house with, my aunt and my uncle, and they got busted immediately with their underground comics.
Oh, no.
Which I think one of them was Mickey Rat, which had a lot
Mickey Rat, right. I remember Mickey Rat. Yeah.
Which had some shagging in it, so they got immediately busted. I remember I was scared. I was scared to death because my uncle was a big, giant, scary Irish San Francisco police officer.
Okay.
I mean, he was giant. He had white hair. He had a big white mustache. And he was, his name was Charles White. So,
okay.
There you go. Right there. Put him in the profile. Uncle Charlie, like, I think he beat the crap out of the both of them, Bobby and
Sure. Right. Yeah.
Sorry, Bobby and Chuck. I'm outing you on the air.
I had a friend of mine whose dad was a cop, and he was in like The Laughing Policeman as a extra, and he even got a line. But my friend would go into his confiscated weapon box that he kept at home and give me switchblades. And like, here's one. Yeah, here's a stiletto. Like, fuck, all right.
Yeah.
Wow.
But hey, do you remember
real quickly? Uncle Charlie rolled up to our house one day, and it was probably, I don't know, it's like the early 70s or whatever. He rolls up to the house and he brings a big color TV for my mom, and I go, "Where'd you get that, Uncle Charlie?" He goes, "I got it in a card game."
That's great. Hey, do you remember, because this is the place that I used to go, the Underground Head Shop on Market Street? I think Street. Yeah. And I remember I'd go there because that's where you could find a lot of the cool magazines, always like blacklight posters. Yeah. And then Bruce Lee stuff, because I was crazy for Bruce Lee.
Right.
And my dad would take me. And, and like, and he was like, he'd look around and he'd go, "Okay, we're just here for the Bruce Lee shit." So unfortunately for him, we're not
here for the bong. We're not here for bongs.
Right.
Yeah. Unfortunately for him, a few years later, I went back for the other stuff. But
that happens.
That happens.
I don't think I wanted to go in that shop. Usually Market Street was a little scary,
especially then too.
It had pretty much fallen apart at that point. And it was it was kind of a shady part of town. Still is a little bit. Still
yeah. Oh yeah. I hear.
I don't think my mom wanted me going in there, but I think I went in there a couple times with my aunt, my mom's twin sister, the evil twin. So my mom's evil twin would take me in there. And we only went in there once or twice. I think I got, I don't know. I must have been like 7 or 8 years old, and I got the Raquel Welch poster from 1 Million BC.
Oh yeah,
sure. We know it well.
I think I got the Raquel Welch, and I got the Kong. They had two different Kong. Right, there were two different Kong posters. Big
There's
black
like
and white posters.
the more horizontal one, right? It was like longer than shorter. Than taller, and it was like I had that also.
And they had the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms too, right?
Right. It was it's the Beast headshot.
Yeah. It is.
Right. Yeah. So they had those kind of posters, So I was like, of course,
Sure.
And back then Market Street still had a lot of theaters operating, even though they were kind of on the more Fleabaggy end at that point.
Oh yeah.
And so you had
the
one
Strand.
Well, you had besides the Strand,
not O'Farrell. What was it? St. Francis.
Yeah, you had the St. Francis. You had some of them changed names so many times. You had the Esquire, showed a lot of horror, sci-fi, fantasy films.
Yeah.
And I think they went under like in 75, I think is when they closed. The Market Street Theater, which was a United Artists Theater, that became the infamous strip club, the Market Street Cinema. And that was like a kind of a prestige United Artists Theater at one time.
For a man of discerning taste.
Right. And the Golden Gate Theater, which is, is mostly known for doing like The Lion King and
sure. I used to work
like
there.
That. Oh, did you? When it was a movie theater or when it was a
when it was a stage show? Yeah, I used to work.
Yeah.
I worked backstage and as an usher.
Oh, crazy!
Yeah,
because I saw the Andromeda Strain there.
Wow, that's a beautiful theater.
I begged my aunt. Like I saw the shot of the guy with the mask on with the mesh mask, just the lobby card, and I was like, say this movie. And, my aunt like passes out, in the middle of the movie. I don't know what the hell's going on. I'm like 5 years old or whatever, but I'm just like staring at the movie. Like, and that's one thing as a kid, I'm not trying to blow my own horn, but it's like I would be glued to the screen.
Yeah. Because you know something. You're just taking it in an innocent way. You just like, yeah.
In fact, trying to rope this back around to Ultraman.
Well, not yet, just because we're still waiting for Larry. Has Larry?
Yeah, Larry responded. He says he knows he'll be back on soon. He says, keep going.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
We're having a very hot evening tonight. So I had to just I just had to open a window.
Oh my God! In San Francisco?
You're in San Francisco, right?
Yeah.
August?
Unbelievable.
I'm very close to Japantown, in fact.
Very good. Yeah.
Which wasn't done on purpose, strangely enough.
Just off topic, really quick, Matt.
Yeah.
When you were on that Bob Wilkins show, and you had all that Godzilla stuff out there in front, and I'm looking at the TV set and I'm like drooling, and Bob Wilkins goes, "So where did you get this stuff?" And you go, "I got it at the Japanese Cultural Center here in San Francisco." Now, my parents we were living in San Jose, but my grandparents lived in San Francisco in the Sunset District. And every time we went to see my grandparents, I'd ask my dad, "Can we please go to the Japanese Cultural Center?" And my dad says, "Oh, it's too far away. It's too far away." I mean, I ended up not going there until I was 18.
Wow.
My first time.
I just have to tell you that the Japan Cultural Center wasn't that far from the Sunset.
I know. Right. I know. But August, what my parents had 7 kids. It's like, they don't want to take us all there.
No.
To get, to go any place like my dad taking me to the underground head shop,
right?
Or getting him, oh my God, to go to Berkeley to the Federation Trading Post.
Yeah. Federation Trading Post.
Yeah.
And then there was another one that after the Federation Trading Post closed, there was another Star Trek shop on Shattuck that later became like mostly a comic book store. They had a big Enterprise hanging from the ceiling in it. And that was called the Starbase Central, or it was called something. It was called something.
It sounds familiar. I think that was Starbase Central.
I don't know. It was called something like that. It was in Berkeley, and that was after the Federation Trading Post had closed shop, and it was turning over in the 80s. In the early 80s, they still had the Enterprise hanging from the ceiling in there. It was a huge Enterprise. It was probably about a 10-foot long Enterprise.
Wow.
So the Federation Trading Post, and I used to haunt the cinema shop on O'Farrell Street.
Oh yeah. What was that guy? Steve, who used to
Steve, Steve Imamura.
Yeah. I got so many things from him. Oh my goodness.
You know what I often heard? The most often thing I heard going to cinema shop when I was a kid was I'd walk through the threshold and Imamura would look up at me and go, "We have no new Godzilla stuff this week, Augie."
The first time I visited the Japan Cultural Center, I just moved to LA in '94, and I took a road trip up to San Fran, and I went to the bookstore in the Cultural Center.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at the section where they have like Godzilla books.
Right.
And you were standing there, and you were kind enough to introduce yourself to me. And to ask me if I was interested in this stuff. And we exchanged addresses, and you ended up sending me like a copy of Markalite and Japanese Science magazine.
What a good guy.
you.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I have to thank you for that almost 30 years later.
Wow, man. Crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
See the lives you've touched.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And hopefully that's the only way I've touched. I'm not running for any political office.
Oh, there you go. Whew,
Won't be
okay.
touching anybody inappropriately.
There you go.
But getting back to Tokusatsu.
Yeah.
Let me pick it up
Wow,
from where I was.
No, thanks for sharing that story, man.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
Wow.
for making
That
that
blows me.
gesture.
That
'Cause I-
kind of blows me away, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, we Tokusatsu fans got to stick together, right?
This is
right.
this is true. This is true. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Thanks for God. Crazy. Thank you.
Nice. Is it over now?
Well, we have to do the
One last
on that
thing.
note. On that
Yeah.
Oh
note.
yeah.
So what is that?
I don't know.
On that
Go.
note.
Go, Larry.
On that note, I am Matt Weinhold. I'm Shawn
No,
Sheridan.
I know that. I also you remember that part of it.
Yeah.
Watch Tokusatsu
Watch
TV shows
Tokusatsu
and movies.
It's got to be some catchphrase from one of the shows, right?
Well, or like and watch out for TV fly. I don't know.
Or
I'll go bzzz.
I was
TV
gonna
fly.
I was gonna say Starfish Hitler, but I don't want to end with Hitler. Maybe
Yeah, probably
maybe
the
Bad-
last thing
Bad
we somehow
Frankenstein.
be put on some list if the last word
Yeah,
of our
yeah.
podcast is Hitler.
Yeah, sure. Wait, what all let's see. What all
Or can-
But that's just a joke. Really, you could say Starfish.
um,
It's there's not a big controversy about Hitler.
Are there
What do you mean?
I think he's
What's-
recognized pretty much as not being a good guy.
but what's okay, so what's like a what's one of the common phrases or something, a term from Ultraman? I mean, what
from
can
Kamen
we say?
Rider?
Or Ultraman or or take your beta capsules or something
Yes.
like, something like that. like-
Change you.
Well, Henshin means transform, and that's Kamen Rider.
Okay.
But I don't know.
We could do what James does at the watch Tokusatsu films and television, and we could do what James does. He goes, "Kampai." We could just do that.
But we just did Kampai Toast with August, though.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah.
If only I had my notes in
'cause-
front of me.
Well,
Oh, no.
no, it's a great idea. But
I kind of like the TV fly. I'm going back to that idea. Like,
I'm fine with I'm fine with TV.
I'm good.
Watch-
I'm good with anything right now.
Oh
watch anything under the description of Tokusatsu. Oh no, here comes TV fly.
Well, no. We should say, but don't watch in TV Fly's eyes. But don't be hypnotized by TV Fly because you're
But
watching.
don't watch it on TV.
Yeah, something like that, right? But don't watch it on TV Fly or something.
Don't watch it on TV fly. I think that works.
Yeah, like you could just say that at the end or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
You'll be hypnotized. Or something.
Once again,
I'm good with
the
that.
cheerleading ability of Larry. Yeah, all right. Fucking TV fly.
Do you know, this has been 4 hours.
This
Yeah.
is, I'm
And I
telling
still like
man.
you.
The
How about
marathon.
that?
This is
The
a.
marathon.
Is it
think so. You
TV
should
Fly
say
or
that.
the TV Fly?
I think it's TV Fly.
I think usually with these shows,
Yeah,
it's not like
that-
the. It's like
that's his name. That's
yeah,
like
his
I said,
name.
he's
Like
TV
yeah, that's his
Fly.
first name is TV.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I like the idea of zzz, and then we go no. Ah!
Oh, good.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I like
So,
that.
I can do the zzz sound, or anybody can do a
Oh, is that
Go
is that at the very end after
at
you
the
say
very
TV?
end.
Okay, so we'll do
Oh.
the buzzing, and then Matt, you should say the don't TV Fly. I think.
No, you do TV fly.
Okay.
You say, but don't watch it on TV fly. And then
Okay,
after
okay.
that,
We can all do.
we go, oh no,
or-
TV fly. Oh no,
Okay,
TV fly. And then
Gotcha.
ah!
It's like I'm being hypnotized or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Okay, ready?
Well, let's
Here we
give
go.
it a shot.
Let's give it a shot. Okay, here we go. On that note, I am Matt Weinhold.
I'm Shawn
Oh,
Sheridan.
let me start that again. Let me say it again. Sorry.
It's Weinhold.
What's my name again? What? Weinhold, not the Weinhold.
The Weinhold.
Okay.
If this was like 50s, you might say the Weinhold. You might do that.
Like the Fonz.
Yeah,
Oh yeah. All right.
you would have done that.
No, it sounds too much like a thing that Ron Popeil would sell. It's the wine hold. Art of holding your wine. Get the wine hold.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
good.
And there's the pocket wine hold. It's for dirty things. Okay. Here we go.